Welcome everybody to another episode of, Casual Comrades. We're gonna, hi, hello. Hello, El Sinistero. We're gonna cheer you up today. We got some really good materials and a little bit of hope, a little bit of thought about the problems and a little bit of thought about the solutions. We got a really nice professor today. I'm not 100% on board with everything and every single detail, but all in all, it's very awesome what Mr. Carlos Taibo has to offer to us, and he makes his lectures mostly in Spanish. So I thought maybe I could share with y'all some of the goodness, some of the good stuff. Okay. You dropped your laptop today, and the screen is white. Ooh. That screen got a little bit of hit. Maybe you can repair it. Hopefully you can repair it. There's, some tweaking involved, probably. Hopefully. I hope you get that laptop back in shape. But yeah, we got some good stuff today. So, let's make it happen. Damn it. Okay. So what I got for you all is Mr. Carlos Taibo. Let me show it to you. It's this guy over here, professor at the Autónoma University. Let me see if I can. There you go.
Gracias, Ángel, por tus palabras de presentación y gracias
can escape the presentation,
a
okay?
las amigas de Segovia por invitarme a compartir un rato más con todas vosotras. En los últimos años he publicado dos libros.
He published a couple of books in the recent years, and both of them have the collapse, the word collapse in the title. Well, Carlos Taibo is described being 42, is life, the universe, and everything. It's the magic number in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, so that's got to be worth something for sure. I'm 44, going to 45 on December the 4th, so, it's fine. You just get older. Body decays and everything. We lived. That's gotta count. So both of the books of Professor Taibo have the word collapse in them.
El primero es el que ha invocado hace un momento Ángel, y el segundo es otro que tenéis algunas copias allí con el título Ante el colapso.
So this is
Voy a intentar en los
before the collapse, and this is before COVID-19, which is fascinating in a way that these predictions worked like a clockwork. Says he's gonna try.
Próximos minutos es formular una especie de síntesis de lo que
He's gonna try and synthesize what's in those
he
books.
procurado transmitir a través de esas dos obras. Sabéis que en las dos últimas semanas se han celebrado en Madrid dos cumbres sobre el clima, una oficial.
So this was back in the day when there was this climate summit in Madrid, the official one and the unofficial one.
Otra alternativa.
The alternative
No me
one.
queda más remedio que suscribir lo que acaba de decir Ángel en relación con la oficial. Me limitaré a señalar que ayer la ministra de Transición Ecológica, la señora Teresa Rivera.
So there's this minister in the Spanish government. There was this minister ecological transition.
Rivera afirmó que la cumbre oficial le había dejado un sabor agridulce.
And she said that the official summit left in her a little bit of a sweet and sour flavor, And yeah.
Si asumimos la tarea, que creo que es inevitable, de traducir la neolengua oficial.
And he says, like, if we assume the task that is that of translating the official newspeak.
Estaba reconociendo que había sido un fiasco manifiesto.
She was basically recognizing that it was a total fiasco. Then again, the climate summit.
Temo que eso es lo que incluso los medios de incomunicación del sistema han acabado por transmitir.
I love that he calls the media of in communication from the system, and it's so true. And they kind of let that seep in their discourse as well, which is fun.
Yo no sé si soplan mejores vientos en lo que respecta al discurso contestatario en lo que hace al cambio o a la crisis climática. En este caso, intuyo que Rivera. Yo no sé si soplan mejores vientos en lo que respecta al discurso contestatario en lo que hace al cambio o a la crisis climática.
So he's not really sure if there are better winds blowing regarding the climate change protest movement, against, climate change and the whole fake-ass climate summits and so on.
En este caso, intuyo que
it's his intuition in this case that
balance provisional invita a identificar datos saludables y otros que tal vez no lo son tanto.
That a provisional analysis would invite to, to give some, to have some positive data and some of it not so much.
¿Cuáles son los datos saludables?
What are the good data,
es que
the healthy ones?
Está hoy claramente sobre la mesa.
And the healthy part is that the debate is definitely on the table.
Al margen de eso, sabéis que han visto la luz movimientos que han tenido la virtud de movilizar ante todo a mucha gente joven.
In base of that, you've seen that there were movements that had the virtue of mobilizing a lot of youth.
¿Cuál es la contrapartida?
What's the counterpart for this? What's the side B? Yeah, what's the downside?
En mi interpretación de los hechos,
in his opinion,
estamos asistiendo a cierto descafeinamiento del contenido de la propuesta alternativa.
So the downside is that the alternative protest is being reduced a little bit in the radicality. It's been like more a protest light, if you will. Oh, you're stopping smoking. I would recommend it. I never started. I'm very lucky, but I've seen the struggle of many friends, trying to quit smoking, and it's not easy. So go ahead, go for it, and get rid of that chain. That's a problem for you, and when you get rid of that problem, you'll be better off.
Un descafeinamiento que desde mi punto de vista se revela a través de tres hechos diferentes. El primero es lo que entiendo una concentración abusiva en la discusión sobre el cambio climático.
So he's saying that this watering down of the discourse around climate change, about the opposition, it's like the discourse is being a little bit, what did he say again? There was someone coughing, sorry.
Se revela a través de tres hechos diferentes. El primero es
three what? I'm going to read their lips.
A través de tres hechos diferentes. El primero es
I don't know what he says.
Entiendo una concentración abusiva en la discusión sobre el cambio climático.
So there's an abusive concentration in the discussion about climate change.
Que olvida otros elementos importantes. Tendré más adelante la oportunidad de referirme a ellos.
And it's forgetting some very important elements, and he'll touch upon them later in the conference.
Que participan del concepto de colapso, por ejemplo.
And they participate in the concept of the collapse in a way that the collapse, climate change is one of the parts of the collapse, and the collapse is more, in his concept, is more an integral thing, a whole thing, right? It's a collapse of humanity in general.
El agotamiento de todas las materias primas energéticas que hoy empleamos.
And he's talking about how most of the primary resources, basically the primary resources are running out, and people are not telling,
La segunda señal
Second
de
sign,
descafeinamiento es que pese a todo, pese a los esfuerzos que entiendo son fundamentalmente retóricos.
And a second sign of this watering down is that despite of of the of all of the efforts, and all of the stuff. That the efforts that are merely rhetorical, Uh, so despite of the effort, that are basically rhetorical in his opinion. Let me go back at it a little bit.
Los países del sur siguen siendo los grandes olvidados. Y en singular,
the global south are like the big forgotten countries, basically. And in particular,
las mujeres de los países del sur.
The women of the global south.
Enuncio un tercer elemento que invita a concluir que estamos perdiendo masa crítica en lo que respecta a la consideración de problemas fundamentales.
He is also pointing out that this third element, which is the loss of critical mass in the discussion around fundamental problems.
En mi lectura de los hechos,
in his reading of the facts,
nuevos movimientos,
these new movements
hace un momento,
he just mentioned,
a menudo, no siempre,
often, not always,
una versión nebulosa de los hechos,
transmit like a nebulous version of the facts
que propende poco a analizar las causas y los efectos de esos hechos.
That tends not so much or very little to analyze the causes of those effects. It's like very short-term analysis, right?
Pareciera como si en las voces de determinadas gentes que aparecen en los medios de comunicación,
it may seem as in the voices of certain people that appear a lot on the media,
el cambio climático hubiese surgido casi de la nada.
Climate change would have come like out of the blue, right? Yeah. Whoops, did I press the wrong button? Damn it. Sorry about that.
Pese a los esfuerzos que entiendo son fundamentalmente retóricos, los países de los países del sur.
There you go.
Enuncio respecto a la consideración de problemas fundamentales que he mencionado hace un momento. A menudo, no siempre, transmiten una versión nebulosa de los hechos.
Yeah, the nebulous version of the facts.
Analizar las causas y los efectos de esos hechos.
That doesn't analyze the causes and the effects of those
si
facts.
En las voces de determinadas gentes que aparecen en los medios de comunicación,
these people who appear so much in the media,
hubiese surgido
climate change would have come out of the blue.
No se menciona la palabra capitalismo.
Capitalism is a word that is a little bit taboo, is barely mentioned there. And the consequences
de lo que tenemos por delante
of what we have ahead of us
se presentan, creo yo, de manera un poco vaporosa,
are presented like in a nebulous way, a little
ignorando
bit.
Que eso que tenemos por delante presenta perfiles realmente inquietantes.
That's this thing that we have ahead of us. It presents like very unsettling profiles.
Y difíciles de esquivar, hagamos lo que hagamos ahora o dentro de 2 o de 3 años.
And very difficult to avoid whatever we do now or in 2 or 3 years.
Bueno,
well,
a efectos de apuntalar esta tesis general,
so in order to build up this general thesis,
propongo transmitiros un puñado de ideas. ¿Cuál es la
he's proposing to transmit a set of ideas.
primera?
First one would be
Hace 10 o 12 años,
10 or 12 years ago,
sobre decrecimiento,
when he started to work on the concept of degrowth.
Por detrás estaba la idea de que las herramientas que proporcionaba la perspectiva del decrecimiento debían permitirnos esquivar el riesgo de un colapso general del sistema.
So behind the idea of degrowth, there was a set of tools that were supposedly meant to prevent a general collapse of the system.
Con el paso de los años,
along the years,
cambiando civilinamente.
It's been changing little by little. And today,
me siento más cómodo con la afirmación de que esas herramientas,
he's way more comfortable with the affirmation that those tools,
que siguen siendo útiles,
that are still useful,
lo van a ser para movernos en el escenario posterior al colapso.
Will be good for us to move in the scenario after the collapse. So the collapse is, I think we're all seeing it right now. The collapse is absolutely inevitable, yeah? So, yeah, and women are being left behind. And women from the global south have it worse than anybody else, to be honest. But yeah.
Y no para esquivar un colapso que entiendo va a ser difícilmente evitable.
So, there's no point in avoiding a collapse that is going to be difficultly evitable. This was done before the 2020 collapse. I would say that the collapse is ongoing right now. So this was a few years ago, and it's dated on December 18th of 2019. So it's December 2019, but just before the shit went down. But there's a few predictions here that are very interesting. Check it out.
Cuando hablo de colapso, ¿en qué estoy pensando?
When he's talking about collapse, what is he thinking about?
En este caso no me queda más remedio que remitirme a conceptos que manejé aquí mismo en Segovia hace 2 o 3 años cuando presenté ese libro.
So in this case, he has no other option but to go back to concepts that he presented in Segovia a few years before this conference, presenting the other book.
Estoy pensando, en primer lugar, en un proceso irreversible.
Thinking first of all in an irreversible process.
Al fin y al cabo, lo que distingue el colapso de una mera crisis.
Which is, what can, discern the collapse from a mere crisis.
Cuando hablamos de una crisis, parece que damos por descontado que es posible regresar al escenario anterior.
So when we speak of a crisis, it looks like we take for granted that we're able to go back to a former scenario.
Cuando nos referimos al colapso, este horizonte no se hace valer.
When we talk about collapse, this horizon is unviable, basically. There's no going back.
Un segundo elemento importante en la articulación del concepto asume la forma de una pregunta. ¿El colapso es fundamentalmente un proceso o se trata, por el contrario, de un momento?
So we need to ask ourselves if the collapse is a process or is it basically a moment.
En una primera lectura,
in the first reading,
es evidente que estamos delante de un proceso.
Would be plain to see that we're in front of a process right now.
Si hablamos de las consecuencias del cambio climático,
if we talk about the consequences of climate change,
sabemos que una de ellas, fundamental, es una subida paulatina, procesual, de la temperatura media del planeta.
We know that there's this rise, this continuous and slow rise of the temperature of the planet. It's kind of gradual.
Si nos referimos a los efectos del agotamiento del petróleo,
of course, if we talk about the effects of the oil running out,
sabemos de nuevo que ese agotamiento es paulatino, procesual.
We also know that running out of that scarcity of oil is going to be gradual as well, processual, as he says.
Debo recordaros, sin embargo, que la lógica del capitalismo contemporáneo es muy a menudo la del estallido de las burbujas especulativas, financieras o inmobiliarias.
So he must remind us that the nature of financial capitalism is the explosion of bubbles, speculative or financial or real estate bubbles, right? Let's address what's going on in the chat. Oh, the Crike. Yeah, it's Irish. Yeah, cool. Yeah, other than thinking of the collapse and vibing. So glad you're vibing. We're going to do some vibing at the end. We're going to do some comfort. Don't worry, because Professor Taibo is coming with some really interesting recipes. We're just describing right now the problem, which is something that we know very well. Crack. Cool. Yeah, what's cooking? That's more or less crack. Enjoyable conversation, particularly prominent in Ireland. It's often used with a definite article, the crack. As in the expression, what's the crack? Meaning, how are you? What's happening? What's up? ¿Qué pasa? So yeah, financial and all kinds of bubbles in capitalism.
Intentemos salir de este entuerto. Creo que lo razonable es afirmar que el colapso constituye fundamentalmente un proceso que puede conducir, sin embargo, a un momento preciso a partir del cual ese proceso se haga irreversible.
So trying to get out of this mess, he could describe the collapse as a process that could conduct us to another moment or process that would let's try and explain it better.
Constituye fundamentalmente un proceso que puede conducir, sin embargo, a un momento preciso a partir del cual ese proceso se haga irreversible.
So the collapse is a process that would take us to a point where that process is absolutely irreversible, which I think we're a little bit past that right now.
Enuncio un tercer rasgo importante.
So a third important feature.
Relieve que debe corresponder al concepto de complejidad.
So the concept of complexity, which is kind of important.
La tesis principal en este caso nos dice
The main thesis in this case tell us
que cuando las sociedades se van haciendo más complejas,
that when societies start growing in complexity,
para resolver muchos de sus problemas necesitan cantidades crecientes de energía.
In order to solve most of their problems, they need growing amounts of energy.
En un momento en el que la energía
In a moment in which energy
falta.
is absolutely lacking.
Creo que esta tesis, expresada, bien es cierto, de manera demasiado simple,
So I think he thinks this thesis, when expressed in a very simple way,
con vocación fundamentalmente pedagógica,
with a fundamentally pedagogical vocation,
es lo que recorre todo lo que vais a escuchar a continuación.
is the connecting part of everything that you're about to listen.
Recupero un cuarto y último elemento,
And there's a fourth and last element of this.
en este caso no presente en el concepto de colapso,
In this case, it's not present in the concept of collapse,
pero muy importante para entender sus alrededores.
but it's very important to understand the surroundings of the concept.
Hablo de la influencia de códigos valorativos tanto más delicados cuanto que no solemos ser conscientes de que están ahí.
He talks about the influence of valorative codes that are like so subtle that we sometimes don't know they're even there.
Y esto en dos ámbitos diferentes.
So this happens in two different environments.
Cuando escribí ese libro hace
When he wrote that book
3 años,
3 years ago
por
from that
momentos me
date,
asaltó la idea de que el concepto de colapso
sometimes the idea came to him that the concept of
que
collapse
manejamos en el norte rico
that we are using in the rich north
tiene cierta dimensión etnocéntrica.
has a certain ethnocentric dimension.
Nosotras entendemos qué significa la palabra colapso porque damos por descontado que aún no estamos en el colapso.
We understand the word collapse because we understand that we still are not in that collapse.
De tal manera que comparamos
In a way that we compare
nuestro escenario presente
our current
con lo
situation
que puede ocurrir en el futuro.
with whatever can happen in the future.
Explicar qué es el colapso a una niña nacida en la franja de Gaza
Explaining the collapse to a child who was born in the Gaza Strip
me parece extremadamente difícil.
is extremely complex.
¿Por qué?
Why?
Porque no tiene esa posibilidad de la comparación.
Because she doesn't have that possibility of comparison. In a way, these people are living in the collapse already.
El colapso ha sido su horizonte desde el momento inicial de su vida.
Yeah, the collapse has been her horizon from the very starting moment of her life.
Algo que me interesa subrayar a efectos de llamaros la atención sobre el hecho
Something that he really wants to point out.
de que el colapso no es necesariamente algo que
So we understand the fact that the collapse is
puede
not
acontecer en
necessarily
el futuro.
something that
Es
can
la
happen in the
realidad
future.
presente de muchos seres humanos.
It is the present day of many human beings.
¿Cuál es la segunda manifestación, no menos importante que la anterior, de esos códigos valorativos?
What is the second manifestation, not less important than the former, of those valorative codes, or say that nuance?
Cuando escribí ese libro, decidí incluir un capítulo dedicado a colapsos registrados en el pasado.
When he wrote the other book, he decided to include a chapter that was dedicated to collapses that happened in the past.
Y descubrí, con sorpresa,
And he was surprised to find out,
con desagrado,
and
que la
even
mayoría
a little bit grossed out, that most
de los historiadores del sistema
of the historians of the system
atribuían una condición negativa a 3 consecuencias de esos colapsos que a mi entender son fundamentalmente saludables.
These historians attributed a negative condition to some of the consequences of those collapses, those past collapses, that in his opinion are actually healthy happenings.
La desjerarquización,
Dehierarchization,
las ganancias en materia de autonomía local
gaining in the matters of local autonomy,
y, en fin, la re-ruralización de muchas relaciones.
and re-ruralization of many relationships. Those were, perceived as negatives by most white historians, and he considers them to be positive, and I would have to agree with that. I don't know what y'all think.
Permitidme que lo diga de nuevo. Estos 3 procesos que yo creo que son fundamentalmente saludables.
And he's trying to insist on it, that these 3 processes that in his opinion are absolutely healthy,
A los ojos de los analistas del sistema son unánimemente retratados como negativos.
in the eyes of the systems, the analyst from the system are portrayed as negatives.
Lo que entiendo que hay por detrás de la tesis que estoy defendiendo ahora es la idea de que no todas las consecuencias del colapso están llamadas a ser poco saludables.
What he understands right now is that not all consequences from the collapse are necessarily called to be unfavorable or negative.
¿Cuál es la segunda observación que quiero haceros?
He makes a second
Recupero un
observation
elemento que mencioné antes.
about an element he
Sugerí
mentioned
que, a mi
before.
entender, estábamos en un momento caracterizado por un énfasis abusivo
He understands that they're in a moment that is characterized by an abusive or excessive emphasis
en la discusión sobre el clima en detrimento de otras que eran o podían ser tan relevantes como esa.
in just the climate change discussion, considering that there were other factors that were at least as relevant as that one.
Si alguien me preguntase cuáles son las causas imaginables de un colapso general del sistema,
If somebody would ask him what are the general causes of a general collapse of the system,
respondería con vocación fundamentalmente pedagógica,
he would respond with a very educational will,
que hay 2 principales acompañadas de otras
that there are 2 principal ones that go together with others
que aparentemente menores podrían sin embargo oficiar como multiplicadores de las tensiones.
that apparently minor, they could be beneficial as what did he say?
Que aparentemente menores podrían sin embargo oficiar como multiplicadores de las tensiones.
They could work as multipliers of the tensions.
¿Cuáles son esas 2 causas principales?
So which are those 2 causes?
Climática,
Climate
que ha
crisis.
mencionado Ángel, por un lado, y el agotamiento de todas las materias primas energéticas que hoy empleamos por el otro.
And the running out of all of those energetic primary sources that he's trying to point out. So between, the clamp would be climate change and the energetic resources running out, basically.
¿Qué es lo que me interesa transmitiros en relación con el primero de esos elementos?
So what is he trying to transmit to these people and in general, with those 2 elements?
Crisis climática. Hay un consenso abrumador en el seno de la comunidad científica internacional.
There's an overwhelming consensus in the science community
En lo que hace a la idea de que es inevitable que la temperatura
in the idea that, the climate change is inevitable.
media del planeta suba al menos 2 grados en comparación con los niveles propios de la era preindustrial.
So it's inevitable that the temperature rises at least 2 degrees compared to the pre-industrial era temperatures. So this rise is off the table. It's gonna happen.
Cuando alcancemos ese momento, nadie sabe lo que viene después.
When we reach that point, nobody knows what's coming after that.
En cualquier caso,
At any rate,
saludable.
it's not healthy.
Yo mismo, en el pasado,
He
en
himself in
alguna
the past,
ocasión, me he
sometimes
dejado llevar por una tesis que hoy entiendo tiene poco fundamento.
he went along with a thesis that he understands today that is not very well funded.
He dicho, si mañana los gobiernos de los 200 estados existentes en el planeta se pusiesen de acuerdo y decidiesen reducir a la nada
He said that if all of the governments of all of the countries in the planet would agree and they would reduce their carbon emissions to zero
rápidamente
very
las
fast,
emisiones de CO2, podríamos esquivar el cambio climático y por extensión tal vez el propio colapso.
they could avoid climate change and therefore by extension the collapse itself.
¿Cuál es el problema de esta tesis?
What's the problem of the
El
thesis?
problema radica en el hecho de que da por descontado
The problem the problem lays in the fact that it takes for granted
que el cambio climático es la consecuencia de lo que hemos hecho en los 20 o 30 últimos años.
the climate change is the consequence of what they have done in the last 20 to 30 years.
Cuando con toda evidencia en su origen
When all of the evidence points that
está
its origin
la
is
conducta de la especie humana en los 2 últimos siglos,
the origin is in the behavior of the human species in the 2 last centuries,
la era industrial,
the
y
industrial age,
probablemente en los
probably
4 últimos milenios,
in the 4
al calor
last
de un
millennia,
proceso paulatino
at the
de
heat of the
erosión de nuestra relación con el hábitat.
at the heat of the let's say slow but steady process of our separation from our environment.
Lo digo de otra manera.
In
Aunque
another
mañana
terms,
consiguiésemos reducir a la nada las emisiones de CO2,
even when tomorrow we could reduce completely the CO2 emissions,
los efectos de lo que hicimos en el pasado
the effects of what we did in the past
acabarían por llegar
would end up coming
prácticamente en los mismos términos.
mostly in the same terms.
¿Sabéis cuáles son las consecuencias principales del cambio climático?
So you know more or less the main consequences of the climate change.
Un incremento general de las temperaturas,
General
la subida del nivel
increment
del
of
mar,
temperature,
el progresivo
raise of the sea
deshielo de los
level,
polos, la desaparición de
the
muchas
melting of the ice caps,
especies,
the reduction, the absolute reduction in biodiversity,
la desertización, la desertificación,
the advancement of deserts,
la manifestación, en fin, de problemas sin cuento en el despliegue de la agricultura y de la ganadería.
so unprecedented problems in the deployment of agriculture and cattle industries that would impact in our food.
Sabéis también probablemente que hay
You probably know as
países
well that
como Canadá o Rusia
there are countries
en
like
los
Canada or
cuales
Russia
grupos de presión importantes
in which many important lobbies
se sirven a afirmar que el cambio climático está llamado a tener consecuencias saludables
want to say that climate change is called to have like very healthy consequences
a través, ante todo, del incremento de la superficie agrícola útil.
through mostly the increment of useful surface for agriculture.
Creo que es un argumento rápido y tan brutal que sus eventuales consecuencias positivas en determinadas regiones
It skipped the video, but he was gonna say that was a shit argument, and probably the change is gonna be so quick and so brutal that
del planeta me parece que serán inequívocamente anecdóticas.
yeah, that's probably gonna be an anecdotal benefit compared to the all the problems that climate change is gonna cause.
Que quiero transmitiros en relación con el segundo gran factor que invoqué, el agotamiento de las materias primas energéticas.
So the second factor that he invoked is the running out of energy resources.
Según una estimación que admito que es controvertida,
According to an estimation that he admits is a little bit controversial,
de no disponer del petróleo, del gas natural y del carbón,
when not made available, not having oil, natural gas, and coal available,
el 67% de los integrantes de la especie humana perecerían.
67% of the human population would perish. That's a little bit of a controversial statement, I should say.
A los ojos de Antonio Turiel, que es el máximo experto español en el llamado pico del petróleo.
So according to Antonio Turiel, which is one of the eminences in Spain in the peak of what they call the oil peak.
El pico conjunto de las fuentes no renovables de energía.
The peak of new non-renewable energy sources.
Petróleo,
oil,
gas natural y el carbón.
Natural gas and coal.
El pasado año 2018.
Was reached on 2018.
En lenguaje más llano, la producción inexorablemente empezará a reducirse.
So production is in plainer language, production of these resources is going down.
Y los precios en paralelo
and prices,
a subir.
Of course, are going to rise.
Estoy dispuesto a aceptar que en el caso de las materias primas energéticas,
he's okay to accept that in the case of the energy resources,
uno puede imaginar una combinación diferente de la que hoy empleamos.
One can imagine a different combination than the one that we employ today,
que vendría a resolver muchos problemas.
Which would maybe solve many problems. I think it's talking about renewable energy sources.
Pero debo llamaros la atención sobre el hecho de que no se está trabajando materialmente en la introducción de esa combinación que por sí sola reclamaría transformaciones radicales en la textura de nuestras sociedades.
But he's calling our attention in the fact that that transformation is not being pushed, is not happening. So because it would include it would include like a lot of deep social and technological transformation. So the result is the result of colonization and then industrialization. Yeah, kind of. And what he proposes is that it comes all the way from the Middle Ages, basically, when we were separating from the very slowly separating, from our environments. And there's a good point in there, but again, talk about most of the originary tribes and peoples, and how their relation to their environment. I think the whole cultural shift that we did, in the quote unquote the West, which whatever that is, but that frame of mind is very detached from the environment. Doesn't take the environment into consideration, and hasn't been taking the environment into consideration for centuries already. So that's another reason you start growing your own vegetables. That's great. Anything, you were seeing peppers, etc. from Spain in the stores. Yeah, you grew your own and cut out the packaging and fuel. Yeah, definitely. The way the northwest of Ireland, not picking my Spanish farmer comrades, it's just an example. Yeah, local. Local is always better, and growing your own food is the best. It's the best feeling in the world as well. So it's a win-win. Everybody wins. Feel attack. The U.S. relies a lot on imported food. All the countries right now rely on imported foods. But the thing is, we can grow, locally, and it's super super fine, Just curious about how we could reverse that's one of the points that he's trying to make in this conversation, is that climate change it's irreversible, and the collapse is also irreversible. But that doesn't mean that we cannot work with it, that we cannot do something about it at a local level. Even when we're going to live through the global collapse, it's about being ready to build a new society from the collapse of the old one, basically. Let's continue.
Algo que me invita a concluir que también aquí llegamos tarde.
Yeah, he's concluding that we're also late to this other point.
Recordaréis que hace un momento he sugerido que junto a estos dos factores principales hay otros que aparentemente secundarios podrían oficiar, sin embargo, como multiplicadores de las tensiones.
So besides besides of these two main factors, there are other that look like secondary factors that could act as modifiers of the whole situation in a very, very, efficient way, right?
¿Cuáles son en una rápida ojeada?
So let's take a quick look at those.
La crisis demográfica,
Demographic crisis,
que castiga en singular a determinadas regiones del planeta.
punishing especially certain regions of the planet.
Un escenario social tétrico, materializado en el hecho de que casi la mitad de la población del globo se ve obligada a malvivir con menos de $2 cada día.
An awful social scenario in which more than half of the global population needs to live with less than $2 a day.
Escenario en el que es muy
You know, the famous efficiency of capitalism.
sencillo que repunte el hambre y repunten también los problemas de acceso al agua en regiones enteras.
So hunger and problems with water access is gonna increase in those regions, and that's true. You know, that's very true. That the global capitalism has been so extractive that climate change is gonna affect way harder those populations than the people like us who are living in quote unquote first world countries, whatever that is, which is an arbitrary classification. But those of us who live in Europe or the United States, and all of the rich countries, pieces of shit, Let's keep it up.
La previsible expansión de las enfermedades en forma de
Diseases are keeping expanding, and he's gonna say in the shape of new pandemics.
epidemias y de pandemias,
Yeah.
de difusión más fácil y rápida o de multiplicación de los cánceres y de las dolencias cardiovasculares.
So multiplication of cancer and cardiovascular disease alongside new epidemics and pandemics. Does it ring a bell, people? Now that we're all knee deep in COVID-19, it kind of does, doesn't it?
Un escenario invivible para las mujeres que anuncia la ratificación de muchas de las reglas del juego propias de la sociedad patriarcal.
So an unbelievable scenario for women that announces most of the rules of the game of the patriarchal scenario, right? Rome had its own industrial revolution. Yeah. If you read accounts of the mining and smelting operations, yeah, definitely. It sounds like some nightmare hellscape. There's even records of it being in the layers, in the ice caps. Yeah. I mean, when we started, extracting, basically, But it's we're here now, but yeah, it's good to see where it comes from. For me, the question is, what do we do now? But it's really good to see exactly, those origins. Absolutely. Mining, extracting, and the impact. And it's like, back in the day, it was like, yeah, it's not so bad. We're doing a lot of harm in this area, but the whole is going to absorb it. But we've been thinking like that for so many centuries that, nothing is going to be left to absorb it. And there's going to be this global hiccup that is going to, basically end with us or end with the way things are right now. It's how do we deal with the new situation? That's another business.
Los efectos caotizadores de la crisis financiera en forma de
The chaotic effects of a financial crisis in the shape of instability,
de confianza y de incertidumbre.
lack of confidence, and uncertainty. Does it ring a bell again? What's got us all depressed and anxious?
La proliferación de violencias varias,
The proliferation of several types of violence,
entre las cuales a buen seguro se contará la que asumirá la forma de genuinas guerras de rapiña desplegadas por las grandes potencias del norte en busca de las materias primas que les faltan.
amongst which we will see the birth of extraction wars in which the big military powers would attack other countries, looking for the primary resources that they lack. It's the Iraq War, basically. The oil in the Middle East. Does it ring a bell?
O en fin, y volveré sobre esto, la idolatría que siguen mereciendo el crecimiento económico y las tecnologías salvadoras.
And also the adoration, this false adoration on economic growth and saving technologies that he is gonna talk about later.
¿Cuál es la tercera observación que quiero haceros?
Another observation coming.
Un objetivo central de ese libro era preguntarme por los rasgos previsibles de la sociedad que emergerá después del colapso.
So one of the main objectives of this book was to ask himself about the previsible, the foreseeable characteristics of a society after collapse.
De la sociedad post-colapsista.
The post-collapse society.
Bien podéis intuir que responder a esta pregunta reclama de dosis muy notables de especulación.
So answering this question would require like a lot of speculation, right? A lot of conjecture, you could say. The threat to women, AFAB body, autonomy has been under the worst threat lately. Yeah, we need to really defend, defend all the oppressed, and of course that includes women and AFAB bodied people, and trans people. Trans people have it super bad. We need to really defend those people. That they're incredibly vulnerable. So let's try and see what's coming from this imagination of the post-collapse world.
No sabemos cuándo se va a producir el colapso.
We don't know when the collapse is going to happen. I mean, we have a hint right now.
Van a ser sus causas precisas.
We don't know what's going to be their exact causes.
¿Cuáles las reacciones que va a suscitar?
And the reaction that it's gonna trigger.
Si se va a tratar fundamentalmente de un proceso o por el contrario de un momento.
Whether it's going to be a longer process or if it's going to be like a single moment of paradigm shift.
De todas estas incógnitas,
from all of these questions,
prestar atención a la primera,
he just wants to pay attention to the first one.
Y hacerlo de la mano de un argumento que ha esgrimido antes Ángel.
And do it by the hand of an argument that the former speaker said.
Quienes, a mi entender, han trabajado seriamente sobre el riesgo de un colapso general del sistema, afirman que ese riesgo no remite a 100 o 150 años de distancia.
Those who have been working on the effects and the study of this collapse are saying that this collapse is not going to happen in 100 or 150 years.
Que tenemos que prestar atención a
that
un
we need to
periodo
pay
crítico
attention.
que es el que separa los años 2020 y 2050.
That we need to pay attention to the critical moment, which is the moment that separates 2020 and 2050. So we're living that moment right now, and we know what came. Again, a certain virus.
Literalmente a la vuelta de la esquina.
Right around the
Aún
corner.
con estas cautelas,
We're on it
son los
already.
rasgos previsibles de la sociedad poscolapsista.
So even with these warnings, what would be the defining features of this post-collapse society?
El primero, obvio, es una reducción general de la población humana.
First of all, obviously, is going to be a general reduction of human population.
En el buen entendido de que lo previsible es que se ajuste a patrones diferentes según unas u otras regiones geográficas.
Of course, understanding that this pattern is going to adjust differently in certain regions.
Un segundo aspecto importante
Second main aspect
es otra reducción, en este caso dramática, de la oferta de energía.
a dramatic increase of the energy offer.
Que dará al traste con la civilización del automóvil, tal y como hoy la conocemos,
That will collapse completely the civilization of the automobile, as we know it,
y también con el comercio internacional.
and also will hit greatly the international trade.
Tened presente que
Take
entre
into
el
account
80 y el 90% de los bienes
That
que
between 80 or 90% of the
mueven el
goods
comercio internacional dependen de los containers,
that the international commerce produces or deals with that are depending on the containers.
de los contenedores, y que lo más sencillo es que esta herramienta de transporte quiebre más antes que después.
And it's very, very easy to predict that this this transportation tool, would go down sooner than later.
Al calor de un proceso general de desglobalización.
At the heat of a general process of deglobalization.
Un tercer elemento importante asumirá la forma de un golpe muy fuerte.
Third important element would assume the shape of a very important, very, very hard shock.
Que padecerán aquellas instancias que se caracterizan por la centralización y por el uso intenso de energía y de tecnología.
So those instances that are depending on centralization and an intense usage of energy and technology will be impacted.
En lenguaje más llano, los estados, las grandes empresas, las fuerzas armadas, por una vez,
Those being the states, big companies, and armed forces.
padecerán lo indecible al calor del proceso de colapso.
And for once, they're going to suffer absolutely in this process of collapse. So I would say that's good, right? Because, states, armies, and multinational corporations, I mean, sign me in.
Un cuarto elemento importante
Fourth
en el terreno
element
económico
in the
asumirá
economic,
la forma de reducción del crecimiento, cierre
reduction of growth,
masivo de empresas,
massive closure of companies,
desempleo generalizado,
generalized unemployment. Does it ring a bell again? COVID-19?
desintegración de los ya de por sí maltrechos estados del bienestar,
Disintegration of the already weak welfare states.
y en suma, elevación en los precios de muchos de los bienes básicos.
And an increase on the prices of most of the basic items.
En ausencia de crecimiento, lo suyo es
In an absence of growth, the thing to do is
sistema financiero quiebre,
the thing we're going to see is the financial system collapsing. The really depressing thing is that you have seen people like him try to talk some sense since you were like a kid, 46 now. And big corps still don't see why. It might be a good idea to not shite on our home. Yeah, of course, but they're gonna collapse. No energy, no oil. They're gonna suffer the most. Hopefully, if we do this right, it's time to organize ourselves, and prepare for the collapse when they're not. We're depending on the forces of the collapse, basically.
y que se manifiesten en paralelo problemas muy graves en el despliegue de la sanidad y de la educación.
So that would result in very grave problems in deployment of healthcare and education.
Con víctimas principales en las de casi siempre, ancianos, mujeres y niños.
So elderly, women and children will suffer the most.
El golpe, en fin, será sin duda más fuerte en las ciudades que en el mundo rural.
So the shock will be much stronger in cities than in the rural world.
Cierto es que no todas las ciudades llevarán igual el proceso. Saldrán mejor paradas aquellas que se hallan en encrucijadas de caminos, que tienen a su alrededor superficies agrícolas importantes.
So it's true that that not all cities will take the hit in the same way. That those that will suffer the way, or that will suffer less, would be the cities that are facing crossroads, or they have like nearby rural areas that could help with the supply.
Que disfrutan de agua en abundancia.
Those cities that have like an abundance of water.
Y que exhiben un carácter fundamentalmente vetusto y tradicional.
And those exhibiting a character that is like a little bit, down and kind of traditional way.
El modelo contrario, el
The opposite
de
model,
ciudad que padecerá lo indecible al calor del colapso,
the cities that are going to suffer the most in the heat of the collapse.
lo ha aportado ya Detroit, la meca de la industria automovilística.
An example of these cities that are gonna suffer the most could be Detroit, the birthplace of the industrial of the automobile industry. It makes sense that everyone is moving more to the right or left. We're in a crisis. Absolutely, crises are polarizing. That's what they do. Except the ones moving right are trying to fight against the inevitable change. Yeah, we need to figure out. The change is going to happen anyway. So we need to figure out how we survive it, basically, and how can we do something good out of the collapse. Basically, that's one of the basic ideas that I'm so most on board. I'm not on board with the 100% he's saying, but he makes a lot of sense. You understand what he means about women and children, but marginalized people will suffer the most. Yeah, of course. Everyone who's not 100% healthy, when you take away healthcare, people are going to suffer, and that sucks. I would argue also that in this collapse, the medical personnel are not going anywhere, and they're going to be the ones who. And considering, during the collapse, even private hospitals, the staff can go like, fuck the owners. We're going to continue working for free for everybody, collectivizing like the other stream that we had where we saw where all the factories and all the places were working without the owners because the owners fled because of the war and the revolution, So same will happen with the collapse, if people are ready to organize. If people are knowing this is going to happen, if people are ready to say, okay, but, company, the infrastructure is there. Okay, we have no fuel or not a lot of energy, but most of the stuff we can use. Let's use it, and let's use it for good. And let's keep the supply up. And if it's not by truck, could be by train. If it's not by train, we could do it with a good old carts and whatnot, We need to figure it out.
Norteamericana que ha experimentado su propio colapso en los 15 últimos años.
So Detroit has experimented its own collapse in the last 15 years.
Aunque el escenario en el mundo rural será más llevadero.
Also, the scenario in the rural world would be easier, but even though that's a fact,
pagaremos los efectos de lo que hemos hecho en las últimas décadas en materia de mal uso de los suelos.
In the rural world, they'll pay also the effects of what they've done in the last decades, and according to how they treat the soil and
de mecanización,
the mechanization, mercantilization, and monocultivation, which is very controversial. The monocultivation models are something we need to really phase out and go for more respect, models that respect the land more, even when they yield less profit, because it's a profit motive. That's a problem all the time, every time. The profit motive is what's ruining everything.
Temo, sin embargo, que no serán estos los únicos problemas que se revelarán en el mundo rural.
So those are not just the only problems that would show in the rural world, to be honest.
He contado muchas veces que hace 3 años compartí con Antonio Turiel, a quien antes mencioné.
So he's trying to mention that 3 years or 4 years now ago from the day that he shared with this guy Antonio Turiel
una mesa redonda en un pueblo de Huesca llamado Binefar,
a conference in a village in Huesca called Binefar,
colindante con Cataluña,
which is close to Catalonia.
Siempre que tengo la oportunidad de hablar de estas materias en regiones deprimidas,
always that he has the opportunity to talk about these matters in oppressed regions,
me ocupo de subrayar que esas regiones serán paradójicamente las que mejor lo lleven en el escenario del colapso.
He tries always to point out that it is those regions that now are depressed that are going to have an easier time in the time of collapse.
¿Por qué?
Why?
Porque son las que menos dependen de energías y tecnologías que tienen que llegar de fuera.
Because they are the ones that depend the least on energies and technologies that have to come from outside.
Probablemente en la comarca de Binefar, que no es una comarca particularmente deprimida,
Probably in this Binefar area, which is not a extremely depressed area, to be honest.
Subrayé los efectos beneficiosos derivados de disponer de una vida agrícola activa, de agua en abundancia y de una baja densidad de población.
He tried to point out the absolute benefits of having an active rural life, an abundance of water, and a low density of population.
¿Cuál era entonces el problema de la comarca de Binefar?
So what was the problem of the Binefar Shire?
El problema se derivaba del hecho de que Binefar está a 200 kilómetros de Barcelona.
The problem is that Binefar is like 200 kilometers away from Barcelona.
Y lo más probable es que en el escenario del colapso
And the most likely is that in the scenario of the collapse,
se produzca una huida masiva de población
there will be a massive movement of population
de las grandes ciudades
from the
y de
big
las
cities
no tan grandes en busca
and
de
smaller
escenarios
cities
más llevaderos.
in the search of easier stages. Yeah, we need to plan for the after. And I have the answers. There are some answers. You'll see. There's a recipe here, basic recipe, but you can figure it out.
De tal suerte que los efectos inicialmente saludables del escenario propio de la comarca de Binefar
So with this movement of population, shires, smaller, places like Binefar would have this
bien pueden
impact.
trocarse rápidamente en lo contrario.
So this could be a big problem for these type of people because their density of population would multiply and, a lot of people flooding to the
¿Cuál es la
villages.
cuarta observación que quiero haceros?
He wants to make
En
another
ese libro
observation.
Hay
That
dos
book,
capítulos que
there's some
sopesan
chapters that
otras tantas reacciones ante el colapso.
are
La
weighing
pro-
some other reactions to the collapse.
Propia de lo que decidí llamar los movimientos por la transición ecosocial y la vinculada con el concepto de ecofascismo.
And the one that is linked to the concept of eco-social transition, and the other one is linked to the concept of ecofascism.
Dejaré claro que no estoy afirmando que son las dos únicas reacciones imaginables ante el colapso.
He wants to point out that these are not the only two possible reactions towards collapse.
Me interesaba, sin embargo,
He was interested in
dos
isolating
perspectivas distintas
two different
que
perspectives
contribuían a enriquecer el debate.
that would contribute to enriching the debate.
Cuando tengo que explicar cuál es, desde mi punto de vista, la propuesta de los movimientos por la transición ecosocial,
When he's trying to explain from his point of view the moving parts of the movements for eco-social transition,
me sirvo comúnmente de 6 verbos:
he uses basically 6 verbs:
decrecer,
degrow,
desurbanizar,
deurbanize,
destecnologizar,
detechnologize,
despatriarcalizar,
depatriarchalize, undoing the patriarchy,
descolonizar
decolonize,
y, en fin, descomplejizar nuestras vidas y nuestras sociedades.
decomplexing our lives and our societies. So take those, try and let that sink in. It's 5 words, 6 concepts, right? Yeah, I hope that book is translated. It's Rumbo al Colapso by Carlos Taibo.
Voy a aparcar un momento el primero de esos verbos de crecer,
So degrow, he's going to put it aside for a moment, put a pin on that one,
porque inmediatamente volveré sobre él.
because he's going to go back on it again.
El segundo,
Second verb,
desurbanizar,
deurbanize.
podemos retratarlo desde el otro lado del espejo hablando de la necesidad de reruralizar nuestras sociedades.
You can take it from the other perspective, saying, okay, we need to re-ruralize our societies. So we need to make less cities and more villages, and have our cities work a little bit more like villages.
No descubro nada cuando recuerdo
It's nothing new when he remembers
que muchos de nuestros abuelos o abuelas
most of our grandparents or grandmothers,
abandonaron el mundo rural y pasaron a vivir en las ciudades
they abandoned the rural environment and they went to live to the
en
cities,
las que entendían legítimamente que el escenario era más llevadero.
in which they legitimately admitted that the scenario was much more amenable.
Hoy asistimos incipientemente a un proceso de signo contrario.
Today we're facing a process that is going to try and take us to the opposite situation. Yeah, simplify. It's a good, decomplex, he said, but yeah, definitely simplify.
En cualquier caso,
In any
las
case,
personas que son moderadamente conscientes
the people who are
del riesgo
moderately conscious
de un colapso general del sistema saben que una de las
of a general collapse of the system know that some
pocas
of
respuestas eficientes
one of the few efficient
de
answers
las que disfrutamos al respecto
that we
pasa
have right
por
now
recuperar
goes
muchos
through
de los
recuperating
elementos de sabiduría popular de nuestros campesinos viejos
the popular knowledge of our old peasants and old farmers and all of that ancient knowledge
y muchas de las prácticas cotidianas de esos habitantes
and many of the everyday practices of those inhabitants
de los países del sur que nos empeñamos en
from the southern countries
describir como si fuesen primitivos y atrasados.
that we obtusely want to portray as primitive and backwards.
Admitiré de buen grado que el tercer verbo, destecnologizar,
He wants to admit that the third verb, de-technologize,
incorpora en su expresión verbal cierto grado de provocación.
is a little bit of a provocation.
Si tengo que utilizar el argumento de manera más mesurada, diré que creo que estamos en la obligación de analizar críticamente cuál es la condición de muchas de las tecnologías que el sistema generosamente nos regala.
So if he needs to analyze this in a more nuanced way, he would put it in a way that we need to analyze the characteristics of many of the technologies that this system is giving us.
No vaya a ser que no tengan esa dimensión emancipadora, liberadora, que comúnmente les atribuimos.
To question if they really have this emancipatory or liberatory characteristic that we usually attribute to them. So really take a look at those technologies and say, are those technologies making our lives better? Are those technologies going to help us in this scenario of the collapse? Your great-grandparents grew up on farms. They had to gather eggs from the chickens before school. Yeah, 1930s. Yeah. We need to figure out and how people live in the global south, and many of that knowledge that is incredibly useful. We've become so dependent on technologies and systems that really are destroying the world, are bringing about global change. So, yeah.
John Searson es el principal teórico de lo que se llama el anarcoprimitivismo.
So he's talking about Jung Sersan, the main theoretician behind anarcho-primitivism.
Siempre digo lo mismo. Es
He
un
always says the same.
pensador desmesurado.
He's an absolute unhinged thinker,
Pero por momentos tengo la impresión
but sometimes he works under the impression
de que solo los pensadores desmesurados son realmente interesantes.
that only unhinged thinkers are the interesting ones.
Searson afirma categóricamente que todas las tecnologías creadas por el capitalismo llevan por detrás la huella de la división del trabajo, de la jerarquía y de la explotación.
Serson affirms categorically that all of the technologies developed under capitalism carry within them the ideology of division of labor and exploitation and alienation.
Es un argumento serio que conviene
And that's a serious argument
tomar en consideración.
that we need to take
Repito
into
que yo no voy
consideration.
tan lejos. Me limito sin más a exhortar, a analizar críticamente la condición de las tecnologías que nos regalan.
So he doesn't want to go that far, but he wants to critically analyze the condition of the technologies that are around us right now.
En un cuarto escalón he hablado de la despatriarcalización de nuestras sociedades.
Fourth verb is depatriarchalization. So, undo the patriarchy of our
Dentro de
societies.
unos minutos voy a defender, lo hago siempre, la construcción de espacios autónomos, autogestionados, desmercantilizados,
He's gonna defend, and as he always does, the building of autonomous spaces that are
de espacios autónomos, autogestionados,
self-reliant,
desmercantilizados
demercantilized,
y ojalá despatriarcalizados.
and hopefully depatriarchalized. So
Esos espacios existen ya y en muchos casos han progresado, en efecto, en el camino de la autogestión.
Those spaces exist already, and actually they have progressed in the way of self-reliance
De la desmercantilización,
and them demercantilizing.
cuando conservan incólumes la mayoría de las reglas del juego propias de la sociedad patriarcal.
But they still preserve untouched all the rules of the patriarchal system.
Según una estimación, el 70% de los pobres,
According to an estimation, 70% of the poor
el 78% de los analfabetos
and 78% of the illiterate
existentes en el planeta son mujeres.
in the planet are women. When you were a kid growing up, during the troubles, almost everybody grew at least some food. Yeah. Small gardens, but they would grow beans, cabbages, etc. Yeah, rhubarb. Yeah, very popular in the north, rhubarb. You got like a lot of moisture and they grow awesome. Delicious rhubarb, by the way. And some fruit bushes, so they could make pies. Yeah, today it's only the older generation who still grow any food. 46 years old and I'm the kid on the allotments. Yeah, I hear you.
Siempre digo lo mismo. Me parecen porcentajes muy llamativos.
Those are very calling percentages, rates of poverty and de-alphabetization of women.
No estoy hablando
worldwide.
de un 52% de mujeres pobres contrapuesto a un 48% de varones.
He's not talking about the 52% of poor women as opposite to the 48% of male poor people.
Me estoy refiriendo
He
a la
means
distancia
the gap.
abismal que separa un 70 de un 30%.
The huge gap that separates a 70% from a 30% in the case of literacy.
Según otra estimación, que admito que es controvertida, las
According to another estimation, which is admittedly controversial,
mujeres realizan el 67% del trabajo
women make the 67% of the work,
cuando reciben a cambio el 10% de la renta.
and they take in exchange 10% of the profits.
En estas condiciones, afirmar, como a menudo se hace,
Affirming under these conditions, as people do
que
often,
los problemas atávicos de marginación simbólica y
that the old problems, the atavic problems of symbolic marginality
material de las mujeres
and material margination of the marginality of the women
la afortunada vía de resolución, me temo que es,
is being solved.
literalmente, darle la espalda a la realidad.
I'm afraid that it's literally turning your back on reality.
El quinto verbo que he utilizado
Fifth
es
verb.
el verbo descolonizar.
Decolonize.
Tenéis también allí alguna copia de un libro que publiqué el año pasado con el título
Mentioning another
Anarquistas
book.
de Ultramar. En
What's the
sustancia,
title
que
again?
publiqué el año pasado con el título Anarquistas de Ultramar.
Okay, anarchist from overseas. I'm gonna raise up the volume.
En sustancia es un intento de examinar cómo los primeros anarquistas europeos
So the book is trying to examine how the European anarchists
que pasaron a vivir en los países del sur
who went to live in southern countries, in the case, when the quote-unquote civil war, which is not actually a civil war, but an extermination war carried on by the fascists after their failed attempt of a coup d'etat.
en las tres últimas décadas del siglo XIX.
Oh, 3 last decades of the 19th century, so it's not that war, it's before that.
En las tres primeras del siglo XX se
third.
relacionaron
3 first decades of the 20th century.
con un sinfín de comunidades indígenas que
And they were relating to an endless number of indigenous communities
desplegaban de forma espontánea prácticas de corte libertario o libertarizante.
that deployed in a spontaneous fashion practices of a libertarian kind or a liberating kind.
La relación
Libertarian in the sense of, our are European anarchists, not the fake-ass libertarian, which is the anarcho-capitalist in the United States, which are absolutely full of shit and they don't deserve to use that word.
Ciertamente fue compleja.
It was a complex transition.
En algunos casos dio frutos muy interesantes.
In some cases, it gave some very interesting fruits.
Pero en la mayoría, me temo que no provocó los cambios en las cabezas de quienes llegaban del norte que hubieran sido necesarios.
But most of the time, those coming from the north were not changed in the way they should have been.
Voy a partir de la intuición muy personal de que el anarquismo es, de todos los hijos de la Ilustración, aquel que mejor preparado estaba para hacer frente al encuentro colonial.
He's gonna say, and he's saying that anarchism is, from all of the children of the Enlightenment, the one that was better suited to face the colonial encounter.
Si el propio anarquismo medio naufragó,
if anarchism itself didn't do such a great job,
¿qué es lo que no habrá que decir de los restantes hijos de la Ilustración?
Go figure what the other children of the Enlightenment have done. And yeah, slavery, colonialism, extractivism, all kinds of abuse, extermination wars, So yeah, from the Enlightenment, even when they're not so successful, the anarchists, those skills aren't being passed to younger generations. I'm looking for an urban garden in my city. Yeah, that's the thing, The bourgeois own the plots, the soil, everything, They own the premises, and most of us live in shitty apartments that are stacked on top of each other, and our only access to land is the parks, where if you plant something, you go to this shitty tragedy of the commons scenario where people don't respect urban parks because they're educated in shitty ways. Certified to teach English as a foreign language. That's cool. Consider moving out of the US to a rural area and to be an educator. Feel my skills would serve better in an area with a lower literacy. Definitely. Go for it. Do it.
Las cosas como fueren, me parece que estamos en la obligación de reconocer el derecho de autodeterminación de los pueblos originarios.
So be that as it may, he proposes, and I agree completely, that we need to concede the right of self-determination of the originary peoples.
De devolver los recursos que en su momento sustrajimos.
To return the resources that we subtracted in this time.
Y de aprender de muchas de las prácticas cotidianas de esas gentes que han demostrado históricamente y, por ejemplo, una relación fluida con el medio natural.
And returning to these practices that have proven to be successful in our relationship with the natural medium.
Recupero el sexto y último verbo.
Sixth and last verb.
Descomplejizar.
Decomplexization. They're so academic words. They sound made up. But yeah, make it simple. Keep it simple.
Hemos aceptado sociedades cada vez más complejas.
We have accepted societies that are more and more complex every time.
Con un correlato muy delicado.
With a very delicate correlation.
Cada vez somos más dependientes.
We are more and more dependent every time. Riendis, welcome to the shitty apartment gang. There's many of us, apparently.
Mi buen amigo Ramón Fernández Durán falleció en Madrid hace 8 años.
His friend Miguel Fernández Durán, he died deceased in Madrid 8 years from the time that this conversation happened.
En sus dos últimos libros,
his last 2 books,
casi póstumos,
almost posthumous books,
una idea.
He repeated over and over the same idea, which said,
muchos de los desheredados del planeta, habitantes de los países del sur, se encuentran, paradójicamente, en mejor posición que la nuestra para hacer frente al colapso general que se avecina.
Many of the people who are oppressed in the planet right now are paradoxically in a better position to face the general collapse that is coming.
¿Por qué?
Why?
Viven en pequeñas comunidades humanas.
Because they live in small human communities.
han preservado una relación mucho más fluida con el medio natural.
They have preserved a much more fluent relationship with the natural medium.
Han mantenido una vida social mucho más rica que la nuestra.
They kept a much richer social life than ours.
Y son, en último término, y paradójicamente, mucho más independientes de lo que lo somos nosotras.
And they are, in the end, much more independent than we are right now today.
Pensad, y creo que no pido ningún ejercicio lujuriante de imaginación,
He's asking us to think, and he's saying that it's not the most absolutely fancy imagination exercise.
que a este lugar en el que estamos, la ciudad de Segovia, dejasen de llegar los suministros de petróleo.
That in your city, whichever city it is, he's talking about the city of Segovia, or he's giving the speech. But go wonder if your city suddenly stopped getting oil resources. For some reason, the oil stopped coming. There was no gas, no trucks, no vehicles, and most of the heating in the winter. Just go figure.
Todo esto se hundiría literalmente de la noche a la mañana.
All of this would collapse literally overnight.
Si queremos recuperar independencia, inexorablemente tendremos que apostar por sociedades menos complejas.
If we want to recover our independence, we need, by all means, to create less complex societies.
¿Cuál es la quinta observación que quiero haceros?
He wants to make yet another observation.
Hace unos minutos señalé
A few minutes
que en
ago,
ese
he
libro
pointed
se
out
incluía otro capítulo relativo al ecofascismo.
that in that book he had another chapter that was related to ecofascism.
Ya sé que el término es moderadamente sorprendente. Estamos acostumbrados a concluir
It's kind of a surprising term for most of the people. We're kind of aware of ecofascism, right?
que el prefijo eco acompaña siempre realidades saludables o como
It's like we're used to find the prefix eco with more healthy ideologies, right, and realities,
poco realidades neutras.
or at least neutral, concepts.
Debo recordaros, sin embargo, que en el Partido Alemán Nacionalsocialista, el partido de Hitler,
So he must remind us that in the German party, National Socialist Party, from the guy with the bad mustache who was really good, really awful at watercolor, who made really ugly watercolor jobs, and he was refused to come to join the art school. He was kicked out of art school. He was never admitted to art school because he was not so good with his watercolor, and who was an idiot. Very bad people.
operó
He operated
un grupo de presión de carácter ecológico
within a pressure group of an ecological character
que defendía la vuelta al mundo rural,
that defended going back to the rural world
que criticaba las consecuencias negativas derivadas
and criticized the negative consequences that stem from industrialization
de la urbanización,
and urbanization.
que postulaba
I mean, yeah, that group did, but he developed, their gang developed some of the most damaging technologies in the war machine. They grew it like, you know how fascists are, hypocrites, basically. It would be so hard not to freeze to death there. It gets to minus 37. Yeah. Minus 37, damn it. Damn it, that's cold. I've been to minus 25 tops. Yeah, he uses a lot of academic language. He's a professor. This guy is very high level. I'm a little bit over my head. By translating,
el despliegue de prácticas de corte vegetariano.
And they were trying to, promote some practices, vegetarian practices.
Todo
and so
ello,
on.
naturalmente, al servicio de una raza elegida que
All of it, of course, at the service of a chosen
estaba
race
en condiciones de imponer reglas del juego de obligado cumplimiento a los demás.
who were in a position, to impose their own rules to other people.
Muchas veces he recomendado en los últimos años,
He has many times recommended in former years,
a buen seguro que lo he hecho también aquí en Segovia,
probably there
la
as
lectura de
well,
un libro de un periodista alemán llamado Carl Ameri.
reading a book from a German journalist called Carl Ameri.
El libro, en su versión castellana, se titula Auschwitz, el nombre del campo de exterminio nazi en
The
Polonia.
title of the book is Auschwitz, the name of the Nazi extermination camp in Poland, which I visited twice. Not a nice experience, but very necessary to get consciousness about the horrors.
Comienza el siglo XXI, entre signos de interrogación.
So, is there a new Auschwitz in the 21st century? Question mark.
La tesis principal que maneja Ameri en esa obra sugiere que estaríamos muy equivocadas.
The main thesis that Ameri is deploying in that work is that we are wrong
Si concluyésemos
If
que
we
las
concluded
políticas que abrazaron los nazis alemanes 80 años atrás
that the policies that were deployed by the German and Nazis many years ago
remiten a un momento histórico singularísimo.
are addressing to a very specific historical time. Oh, thank you, Rendis. I'm trying. Political theory is thick. We need to really land those concepts in layman's terms to talk to people. We really need to. I'm not a big fan of very complicated, extremely academic language myself, to be honest. Like, talk everyday language so people can understand you. And I'm on board with that because, like most of us here, we have serious ADHD and whatnot, and our head is all over the place to be focusing on terms that are extremely precise, yes, but extremely complicated sometimes. So, yeah.
Coyuntural y afortunadamente irrepetible.
I lost this.
Ameri nos exhorta, antes bien, a estudiar en detalle esas políticas.
So it's not a conjunctural specific moment in time that it couldn't be repeated in history. Ameri is invited us to make us those questions,
¿Por qué?
to ask us
Porque
why.
pueden reaparecer en los años venideros.
Because they can
No
reappear in the coming years,
Ahora por ultramarginales grupos neonazis,
not defined right now by ultra-marginal, very fringe neo-Nazi groups,
sino postuladas por algunos de los principales centros de poder político y
but even proposed by some of the main political power centers
económico.
and economic powers.
Cada vez más conscientes de la escasez general que se avecina y cada
And they're more and more consciousness of the general scarcity that's ahead of us.
vez más firmemente decididos a preservar esos recursos escasos en unas pocas manos en virtud de un proyecto de darwinismo social militarizado de ecofascismo.
So they know that the scarcity is coming, and they want to keep those resources for a few select group in a project that is heavily militarized, and it's militarized social Darwinism, he says, which is basically not like actual Darwin said, but the way that shitty right-wingers do.
Como bien podéis intuir,
As you all can well intuit, yeah.
por detrás de la propuesta ecofascista, en lugar central hay una discusión demográfica.
In the center place behind the eco-fascist proposal, there's a demographic proposal.
Está la idea de que en el planeta sobra gente.
There's the idea that there's too much people in the planet. And it was, I remember, I think Peter Coffin made a great video about overpopulation. Just social Darwinism bullshit, You're all familiar with that shit.
De tal manera que se trataría, en la versión más suave, de marginar a quienes sobran.
So in the softer version of this Darwinist, social Darwinist conception of things, it would be just marginalizing those people they don't need.
Esto ya lo hacen. Y en
Which is something they do now. They do already.
la más dura, literalmente, de exterminarlos.
And in the hardest version, of course, would be exterminating the people they don't need.
¿Cuál es la sexta observación que quiero haceros?
Here comes another
Anuncié
observation.
antes que quería volver de manera rápida
He said
sobre
before
la perspectiva del decrecimiento.
he wanted to come back on the perspective of the degrowth.
Esa perspectiva que en mi trabajo cotidiano antecedió a la teoría del colapso.
which is the perspective that in his everyday work was came to him before the theory of collapse.
Me veo siempre en la obligación de explicar el sentido de fondo de una propuesta principal que surge del decrecimiento.
He always says that he always sees himself in the obligation of explaining the perspective behind the growth.
Para hacerlo me vais a permitir que recupere un debate que se registró entre nosotras en España hace 35 o 40 años.
That was happening 35 to 40 years ago.
Entonces a un movimiento pacifista que asomaba la cabeza y a lo que hoy llamamos los sindicatos mayoritarios.
So it involved a pacifist movement that was surging back then, that was kind of starting, and is what we call right now the majority unions in Spain.
El debate se refería al futuro de la industria de armamentos.
The debate was around the weapons industry.
Los pacifistas decían
Pacifists say,
hay que
and he was one of them,
cerrar esas fábricas.
those factories need to shut down.
Los sindicatos respondían,
The unions replied,
preservar los puestos de trabajo.
we need to preserve the jobs.
Lo que estamos diciendo ahora es que un
What they're saying
debate
right
de la
now-
misma naturaleza debe cobrar cuerpo en los años venideros, bien que ampliado a otros muchos sectores económicos que están en el origen del crecimiento disparado de una huella ecológica inasumible.
So they need to recover that kind of debate in a context of these sectors today that are heavily invested in positions and works and jobs and that are demanding an ecological footprint that is absolutely out of the question.
Lo que estamos afirmando es que corresponde reducir la actividad de segmentos de la economía como la industria del automóvil, la de la construcción.
So what they're proposing is to reduce the activity of sectors of the economy that are such as the automobile industry, construction,
La de la aviación,
aviation,
como no, la industria militar,
military industry, of
o
course,
en fin, y por dejarlo ahí, la industria de la publicidad.
and the advertising industry.
Alguien responderá inmediatamente.
There'll be always someone who will reply right away.
Si actuamos de esta manera,
If we do it
generaremos
this way,
millones de desempleados
we'll generate millions of unemployed
en los Estados miembros de la Unión Europea.
in the member states of the European Union.
¿Cómo haremos frente a este innegable problema?
How will we face this undeniable problem?
Desde la perspectiva del decrecimiento,
From the perspective of growth,
la respuesta incorpora dos elementos distintos.
the answer incorporates two different elements.
En primer lugar,
First of all,
propiciaremos el desarrollo de aquellos
we're gonna promote the development
sectores de la
of those
economía
sectors of the
que
economy
tienen relación con los derechos sociales y con la atención al medio natural.
that are related with social rights and the attention to the natural element. An Irish American friend of mine, friend of yours, an all around sound dude, was teaching English in Asia. You don't want to say that which countries, as I forget. Don't worry, I get things mixed up most often, and will most likely get it wrong. But that's sometimes, that's something which would interest you if you could probably, definitely get in touch. Teaching in Asia.
Si queremos decirlo así, estos sectores de la economía seguirán creciendo.
If we want to say like that, these sectors of the economy would keep on growing. So by dismantling or reducing the other sectors that are more, say, polluting or that had like this heavy carbon footprint or ecological footprint, doesn't have to be carbon, but per se. And you instead, put more development on social and environment protection sectors. Those jobs could be just moved from one sector to another.
Y en segundo término, en aquellos segmentos de la economía convencional que inevitablemente seguirán existiendo.
And of course, in the other sectors of the conventional economy that inevitably would keep on existing,
procederemos a repartir el trabajo.
the labor should be redistributed, right?
El efecto de la combinación de estos dos elementos será,
The effect of the combination of these two elements will be,
en términos individuales,
in individual terms,
trabajaremos menos horas,
we will work for less hours
disfrutaremos de mucho más tiempo libre,
and enjoy much more time off.
acrecentaremos nuestra a menudo alicaída vida social y
We will grow, which are often, meager social life,
reduciremos, cuando ello sea posible, nuestros a menudo desbocados niveles de consumo.
and we will reduce as much as possible our absolutely unhinged levels of consumption.
Tengo yo la impresión de que este horizonte es manifiestamente preferible al propio del modo de vida esclavo en el que hoy nos encontramos inmersas.
He works under the impression, and so am I, that this way of life is much more preferable than the awful circus in which we're immersed right now. So, yeah.
Siempre que enuncio este argumento, me veo en la obligación de formular en paralelo dos matizaciones.
Always that he presents this argument, he seems himself in the obligation to present these two caveats, or let's say these two nuanced points.
¿Qué dice la primera?
First says,
No estamos reivindicando, como algunos malévolamente interpretan, llevar los niveles de producción y de consumo a cero.
we're not reivindicating like some bad faith actors are proposing to take the consumption levels to zero.
Esto sería un absurdo.
This would be absurd.
Estamos diciendo que hay que reducir los niveles de producción y de consumo
We're saying that we need to reduce the levels of production and consumption
para reconstruir niveles paralelos aceptables de huella ecológica.
so we can rebuild acceptable levels of ecological footprint.
¿Cuál es la segunda matización? Me
What's the
interesa
second caveat?
muy mucho subrayar que la perspectiva del decrecimiento no tiene un carácter triste y sombrío.
We need to point out that the perspective of degrowth is not a sad and somber perspective at all.
Nos dice que podemos vivir mejor con menos,
It tells us that we can live better with less,
siempre y cuando seamos capaces, claro, de redistribuir radicalmente la riqueza.
as long as we are all able, of course, to redistribute the wealth, which is, what's in the way of this good picture is our, usual suspect, which is like, the profit motive, the mode of capitalist mode of production, basically capitalism is in the way of this. And this is a viable, a premise that needs to be applied, of course, differently in every locality and circumstance. But they're overall very positive, very feasible things to do, right?
El referente mental del decrecimiento no lo aportan unos lamas que viven aislados en un monasterio en una cima del Himalaya.
So the mental image or reference to degrowth is not some lamas who live isolated from everyone on the top of the Himalayas.
Por respetable que pueda ser esta opción.
As much as this option is respectable, of course.
Si alguien se pregunta, lo digo siempre, ¿qué es
If anybody's wondering, he always
lo que
says,
los principales teóricos del decrecimiento reivindican en materia de intercambio sexual?
what the main proposers of degrowth are reivindicating in the matter of sexual exchange?
Responderé que reclaman, no sin paradoja, un crecimiento de las relaciones correspondientes. Que
And paradoxically, I will respond that they were advocating for a growth of the corresponding relationships. That's good. You see, having people spending more time rubbing against each other and less time grinding for useless consumption, that seems like very good news, like a much more enjoyable life, to be honest.
justifican sobre la base de qué? De
Justified on the basis of
la
what?
necesidad de recuperar la vida social que hemos ido dilapidando, obsesionadas como estamos por la lógica de la producción, del consumo, de la competitividad.
What I just said, based on the recovery of this social life that we've been sacrificing for the logic of consumption and productivity, and the capitalist dogma, basically.
Siempre que cuento esto me da por recordar que hace 7 u 8 años.
He wants to remind. He remembers all the time that he tells this. 7 or 8 years ago.
En la Asamblea Popular del 15M.
He was invited to talk about degrowth in the Popular Assembly of the 15M, which was our Occupy, but in Spain.
Acercó un hombre de unos 40 años de edad.
This 40-something year old guy went to him and
me dijo,
and he told him,
una cosa que has contado, Carlos, que me ha gustado muchísimo.
There's this thing that you just told, Carlos, that I really liked.
Anda, ¿y qué es eso?
What is that?
Eso de que tenemos que follar más y mejor.
This thing about we need to have better and more sex.
Bueno, yo no lo he dicho exactamente.
I didn't say exactly like that, he replies.
Que te dé un consejo. No.
Wouldn't you mind that I give you some advice? No, of course.
Tell me. Follar al principio de tu charla.
Tell people about the sex at the beginning of the talk.
Y luego sueltas todo ese rollo sobre.
And then you go you go all the way with all the drag about degrowth, direct democracy and self-sufficiency. That was a good one.
La séptima observación que quiero hacer.
Another observation.
Me interesa subrayar que la perspectiva del decrecimiento no se agota.
He wants to point out the perspective of degrowth is not done
modo alguno,
in any way.
La necesidad de reducir los niveles de producción y de consumo.
In the need to reduce the levels of production and consumption
los países ricos del norte opulense.
In the rich countries of the global north.
Reivindica antes bien la introducción de principios y de valores muy diferentes de los que hoy aplicamos.
It's not just the production; it doesn't stop there. It's reivindicating the set of values that they're really cherishing there. It's about the set of values. Content warning, Taibo. But it's not talking about violence or anything. It's just talking about people being happy, rubbing against each other, being super happy, and having a good time, respectful and joyful. And it doesn't have to actually be rubbing against each other. You can go see friends and hang out. Just get some, I don't know, get some water and watch the landscape and talk about life and life and death and philosophy and just hanging out with friends. Or just go for a walk in the mountains, and because you don't have to grind for work 24/7, right? It's the same reason why places like the Congo are a total mess. You have outside countries, corp, with very unhealthy interest in ripping off their mineral wealth. Yeah. Each one backing its own local warlord. Yeah. When most people of the Congo, like everybody else, want to live in peace and good lives. And it sucks, that they're being destabilized by multinational corporations and backed by, it's not even the countries anymore. It's multinational corporations. It's the capitalist dogma of faster, altius, quitius, fortius, right? Like the faster and stronger and more profit and grind harder and but what we want to do as the bipedal animals we are is just to live in peace and have a good life and enjoy ourselves.
¿Cuáles son esos principios y valores enunciados de nuevo de manera casi telegráfica?
So, which are these principles he's trying to point out in a very, very succinct way?
Primero,
first,
acabo de mencionar,
he just mentioned
la
it.
Recuperación de la vida social.
Recovering the social life.
Que hemos ido dilapidando.
That we've been throwing away, without all the culture of grinding, all the time grinding, hustling all the time. You don't have a life anymore. You just go from your first job to your second job, to food to bed, and repeat, rinse and repeat. because them capitalists need to live their wealthy lifestyles on your back. Not anymore, people. We need to really grow as society. We need to live. We need to stop grinding and start living, right?
Obsesionadas como estamos por la producción, el consumo y la competitividad.
Obsessed as we are by production, consumption, and productivity.
Segunda, el
Second,
ocio creativo. Frente a
creative leisure.
las formas de ocio siempre vinculadas con el dinero,
Instead of ways of leisure that are always linked to money, I see it everywhere. People, cannot fathom just hanging out in the forest or doing something, painting or having a music band or something, just for fun. There's always the profit motive there, punishing people. Absolutely right.
que se nos ofrecen por todas partes.
Everywhere.
Tercera,
Yeah.
el reparto del trabajo.
You don't have to spend money to have fun. That's all. So third, he says the redistribution of work, because he said reparto, but reparto is kind of sharing, but redistribution is more accurate in this case. You talking about hobbies? I mean, he said, rise and grind, commodifying hobbies. Yeah, absolutely. What the fuck? Why do we have to spend money? Why do we have to spend money to have fun? Why can't we have fun without spending money? Whether it's, happily grinding against each other, or again, going out in the forest and taking a walk, or thinking with your friends, about life and death and philosophy, and or making jokes. Just jokes for laughters. Jokes are for free. You can talk with someone and you can make up jokes, and if you're into rap, you can do some rhymes and kick ass and be awesome just for the fun of it. Not to be famous or to make a lot of money, or we need to stop the grind for real. We need to stop the grind. That's all I'm saying.
Una vieja demanda sindical que infelizmente fue muriendo con el paso del tiempo.
Yeah, redistribution of labor is an old union demand that's been like dying. You like to sing shitty karaoke. I'm a big karaoke fan, but I can more or less sing. But I love singing shitty, cheesy songs on the karaoke, going all, one of these days we could do like this Twitch karaoke thing just for fun. The only grinding should be, that kind of grinding. That's the one. That's the one we need to advocate for. You're all healthy people. Go grind against each other and have a good time. That's the kind of grinding we're here for. The other grinding, fuck that. But the other fucking grind that. Okay, moving on.
Cuarta, la necesidad inexorable de reducir las dimensiones de muchas de las infraestructuras productivas.
The inexorable necessity to reduce the what? Sorry.
Inexorable de reducir las dimensiones
Okay.
de muchas de las infraestructuras productivas.
The inexorable need to reduce the dimensions of many of the productive infrastructures. So, not producing big, but also our facilities not being so big, our infrastructures not being so big. You can have a pepper from the village next to you, instead of having a pepper that is being brought from the other side of the ocean in a boat.
Administrativas y de transporte.
Administrative and logistic. So then again, productive, administrative, and logistic structure need to downsize.
Que hoy empleamos.
Yeah.
Quinta, la recuperación de la vida local.
Recovery of local life.
Escenario de reaparición de fórmulas de democracia directa y de autogestión.
And could be the scenario of the appearance of ways of direct democracy and self-administration.
Sexta y última, en
Sixth
el terreno
and last.
individual, la sobriedad y la sencillez voluntarias.
In the individual part, sobriety and simplicity, volunteer sobriety and simplicity, meaning not being absolutely unhinged in our desires, having some kind of a sense of I'm not gonna say self-control, but consciousness, I would say.
Alguien podría dejarse llevar por la tentación legítima de afirmar que esta media docena de principios y de valores que acabo de enunciar...
Yo, Ram Nights! Family day today! Ooh! Yay! That's cool. Spending time with the fam. That's fantastic. Mwah! Okay, let's go back, because Carlos Taibo is saying something important.
Afirmar que esta media docena de principios y de valores que acabo de enunciar nos sitúan fuera del mundo. Que nada...
We could say that these values that he just laid bare right there, they can place us outside of today's world.
Tienen que ver con la organización pasada o presente
That they have nothing to do with the past or present
de
organization
las sociedades humanas.
of the human societies.
Creo firmemente que no es así.
He believes firmly that it's not so.
Hay al menos 4 ámbitos importantes,
There are at least 4 important areas
importantísimos, en los cuales es muy sencillo rastrear la influencia de estos principios y valores.
From which it's very simple to track the influence of these sets of values.
El primero lo aportan muchas de las prácticas históricas del movimiento obrero de siempre.
First of all, it's brought about by the practices of the usual and same old practices of the workers' movements. Yeah, they do a lot of that.
Es verdad que la presencia de esos principios y valores es más sólida, más consistente en el caso de la tradición libertaria.
And it's true that these practices are more solid and more present in the libertarian practice. Again, not libertarian as the United States, but the libertarian, say the European anarchists are loosely anarchists, because libertarian doesn't mean exactly anarchist. But yeah. Yeah, a vegan diet takes 1/8 as much space and 1/5 as much water to produce compared to the standard American diet, and can be carbon negative. Whereas carnism is the primary driver of climate change, veganism is a movement for degrowth. Yeah, it's one of the things that we can do, definitely. I mean, for me, veganism is not just the diet, but a vegan diet definitely is much more sustainable than a diet that is rich in animal products, because they are extremely their ecological footprint is much bigger. To me, veganism is part of an intersectional political stance. It's one of the building blocks of my intersectional political stance, I would say, in which animal rights are important, because animals from all species, we all have a common set of rights that we all should respect. And it's very simple, the simple right of living a dignified life. So defending those rights, for me, it's a key part of veganism, much more important than the diet, like considering that there are people who are living in food deserts and bad stuff, and environmentalism could be, yeah, definitely part of the vegan ethic, because the wild animals have a right to habitat. Absolutely. And we all share like this. I mean, you cannot grant non-human animals like us the full set of the human rights bill, for instance. You cannot say they have the right to work or the right for a housing, or those are very specific for humans. But the right to life is absolutely something we share with our species, and it's not a problem, And discrimination for the reason of species should be something that we need to move away from. But then again, it's my view on it, and I want to impose it on any of y'all, of course. Good day with wife and children. That's so cool. I'm so cool. I'm so glad that you had a good day with wife and the kids. That's so cool. You're so lucky to have someone who wants to keep you. Nobody wants to keep me, but it's fine. I'll live. I'll survive. Alas. So you consider environment? Yes, part of the vegan ethic. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And not a vegetarian, not a vegetarian. Okay, not a vegetarian, but lived in America. Would I be? Yeah. Farming is not the same here in Ireland, definitely, as it is there, and that's not even getting to the food standards. Yeah, long term is the future, but in the U.S. it will probably be it'll probably lag behind dismantling capitalism. Definitely, but there's this collapse. I think it's gonna be a big acceleration of the process. Now, I'm not gonna say accelerationist because that sucks. That's not good. But this collapse is inevitable. This is gonna happen. So it remains to see if it's gonna be more abrupt or more gradual. But in any case, it's gonna happen, and we need to be ready. With the right values, with good values. I hate to say right because right is the other. It's the words. We can reduce our harm to of animals, definitely, and had to reconcile that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. So consuming less and all in all is a good idea. Going back to I don't know where we left
de
this.
la tradición anarquista.
Yeah, of course, because these values are more rooted in the anarchist tradition, okay?
Pero en modo alguno faltan en los de las demás tradiciones del movimiento obrero.
But they're not really lacking in any of the other traditions of the workers' movement, whether it's syndicalism or whether it's Marxism in all its different flavors. The workers' movement has always had these values of redistribution of labor, of more leisure, working less, and degrowth. Degrowth is a necessity by itself, but the values that go with degrowth definitely are present in the workers' movements.
Un segundo terreno de manifestación se despliega al calor de eso que de un tiempo a esta parte llamamos trabajo de cuidados.
So a second leg of this it's deployed in this thing that we call the care work. Who's gonna care of the sick and the old and the young?
Desarrollado fundamentalmente por mujeres.
Which is developed basically by women.
Materializado ante todo en el cuidado amoroso de niños y de ancianos.
Materialize most of all in the care of children and elderly. I would say also in the care of the sick and disabled people. But yeah, definitely.
Las más de las veces lejos de las relaciones monetarias.
Most of the time far away from monetary relationships. Like we do those works for free most of the time, okay? We take care of each other without having to pay each other anything for it. That's why one of the reasons to abolish money in the first place, because money gets in the way of living,
Y siempre ecológicamente sostenible.
And always as ecologically sustainable.
Una explicación, creo yo, razonablemente certera de por qué los movimientos por el decrecimiento se nutren mayoritariamente de mujeres es...
And that would be an explanation that is definitely accurate of why most of the degrowth movements are formed by mostly women.
Una comprensión mucho más
it.
rápida, fluida y espontánea de lo que significan las reglas del juego correspondientes.
It's much more rapid, fluid, and spontaneous of the rules of this game in this case.
El tercer terreno de manifestación de esos
Here goes
principios y
another
valores lo
way of...
configura no sin contradicciones.
There's another way, third way in which these values manifests. Not free of contradictions, he's saying.
La institución familiar.
Is the family institution. Yeah.
La familia.
Family.
Estos neoliberales que todo dicen fiarlo en la mano invisible del mercado.
Those neoliberals who trust so much in this invisible hand of the market.
A buen seguro que no aplican las reglas del juego correspondientes en el interior de sus familias.
We're very sure that they're not really applying the same rules within their own families.
Lo común es que en el interior de la institución familiar prime la lógica del don, del regalo.
So it's very common in the within the family that the logic of the gift of the freebie of the giving, the logic of giving is the most prevalent.
La gratuidad. Para
Everything for free, you don't charge your son or your daughter or your mother with yo, ragweed. Oh, you're tired. Ooh, want to watch at least a few minutes. Definitely, but if you need to lay down, damn it, go for it. Yeah, there's this said that it's solo estar durmiendo es mejor que estar dormido. Only being sleeping is better than being sleepy. Only being asleep is better than being sleepy. So if you need to rest, come on, rest. But good to see you, definitely. So yeah, within the family, things are for free. There's no mercantile relationships in the family, okay?
entendernos, cuando los padres costean los estudios de sus hijos, comúnmente no lo hacen esperando obtener, con el paso del tiempo, alguna suerte de contraprestación económica.
So he says, as an example, is when parents, finance the studies of their children, they usually don't expect a financial retribution, right?
Recupero un cuarto y último elemento que ya mencioné antes
Fourth element that he mentioned
de
before
manifestación de estos principios y valores.
of how these principles and values manifest.
El que aportan por igual muchos de los elementos de sabiduría popular de nuestros campesinos viejos y muchas de las prácticas cotidianas de esos habitantes de los países del sur que solemos describir como primitivos y atrasados.
So these values manifest greatly in the old traditions of our elderly farmers and the people in the badly characterized third world countries. In the global south, and their practices are more connected with those good values, with those good things, right? You were a care for over a decade and gave up a lot of stuff. Yeah, gave up a lot of stuff to do it. You're trained in horticulture and you were planning on getting out of this dead end town. Yeah. Hey, shit happens. And I'd be a total dickhead if I walked out on my parents when they needed me. They looked after my arse for 18 years. Yeah, that's how it works. We take care of each other. We are good to each other. That's like solidarity, but within the family, which is like a given, and that's what we're probably aiming for solidarity to be a common practice. It's something that, of course you do, of course you do, of course you do. It's not not like now, which is why would you do it? That comes to our head, but the attitude must be, of course we do it. You rest soon, yeah. You miss the streams. Well, you're so welcome here. This is your home. You can walk in here in your pajamas and say, yo, and it'll be fine. There's a lot going on in your area currently. Ooh. Good thing you're mobilizing then. Good. Keep up the fight. I may go to something tomorrow too, which reminds me I have to empty some SD cards before I go there. I need to do some dumping of good old cards, okay? Because tomorrow I have a couple of things.
Siempre recupero la misma historia. Está ambientada en una región perdida de la Amazonia brasileña.
So he always goes back to the same story, which is takes place in a lost region in the Brazilian Amazonia.
Unos misioneros se adentran en esa región
So there's missionaries who go deep into that region.
y se topan con unos indios que se dedican a cortar leña con instrumentos extremadamente primitivos.
And they find these guys whose work is chopping wood with extremely primitive instruments.
Los misioneros deciden hacer un esfuerzo y
Missionaries go like, okay, let's help this guy, okay?
regalan a los indios unos cuchillos.
And they give the natives, they give these guys some fancy knives, like machetes probably,
De acero inoxidable
of stainless steel, good stuff, very good quality,
de fabricación norteamericana.
made in the USA.
Un par de años después,
Couple of years later,
los mismos misioneros
same
regresan a
missionaries,
esa región, se encuentran de nuevo con los indios
they come back to this area and find these guys. Couple of years later,
y uno de los primeros pregunta,
and one of the missionaries ask some of the guys,
¿y los cuchillos qué tal?
so how did it go with the knives? And the guy goes,
Muy bien.
well, pretty good.
Tardamos ahora 10 veces menos tiempo que antes en cortar la leña.
It takes us like 10 times less to chop that wood now with those fancy ass knives. Thank you for that.
Estupendo, tercia el misionero.
And the missionary goes like, wow, nice.
Supongo entonces
So
que
I
estaréis
assume-
produciendo 10 veces más leña que antes.
So I assume that you're producing 10 times more wood than before, right? And this guy goes back
El
and
indio
says,
responde perplejo. No,
What?
señor.
No.
Seguimos produciendo la misma cantidad de leña que antes.
no, sir, we no. Come on, man. We're still producing the same amount of wood.
Solo que ahora disfrutamos de 10 veces más tiempo libre, que es lo que sabemos objetivamente guarda relación con nuestro bienestar, con nuestra felicidad.
But we still produce the same amount of wood. It's now that we have 10 times more time off. You know, where we spend more time. We have more free time. Way more free time now, which is what we know it has much more impact in our wellness and our happiness.
Permitidme que subraye que este chip mental es perfectamente racional y respetable.
So he wants everyone to figure out that this mental chip is absolutely rational and respectable. Yeah, I'm making space for new videos. Yeah, I've tried living for 10 years, but you're still here with your grandparents. Yeah, I mean, you know, family is so valuable. There's no, I couldn't even, place the value of family. Family is the best. Splitting wood finally is way easier if you pack it into an old tire. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, that's nice. That's a good trick. So he wants to point out, that this frame of mind is absolutely rational and absolutely respectable, okay?
Aunque se haya evaporado de nuestras cabezas,
And this whole thing evaporated from our heads with this, I would say, it's this Protestant way of conceiving labor, labor of God and work harder and,
de habitantes de las sociedades opulentas.
Yeah, it's basically from the wealthy societies. It's that mindset is absolutely gone right now. It's all competition and grind, but the other grind, the wrong grind.
¿Cuál es la octava y penúltima observación que quiero haceros?
Here goes an eighth observation. I don't know. I can't talk today.
En los círculos en los que yo me muevo, la discusión sobre el colapso.
So in the circles that he's usually frequenting, the discussion around the collapse
Provoca, si así lo queréis, dos reacciones diferentes.
provokes, if you will, a couple of different reactions.
La primera es crudamente realista y nos dice:
First one is absolutely realistic and says,
no nos queda más remedio que aguardar a que llegue el momento del colapso.
we have absolutely no choice to wait until the moment of collapse comes.
¿Por qué?
Why?
Porque será la única fórmula que permita que la abrumadora mayoría de los habitantes de sociedades como las nuestras
Because it will be the only formula that allows that most of the inhabitants of societies like ours
tomen nota de sus deberes, de sus obligaciones.
can absolutely figure out and be absolutely diligent about their homework and their obligations. They take notice, they write it down and say, okay, this is what we need to do.
Esta primera respuesta es sí, crudamente realista.
This first answer is absolutely crudely realistic. It's like very pragmatic, if you will, right?
Pero bien podéis intuir que tiene un carácter desafortunadamente desmovilizador.
But you can also intuit that it has a character that is unfortunately very demobilizing.
Y que parece ignorar por añadidura que el colapso, por definición, se traducirá en una multiplicación espectacular de los problemas.
And it seems to be oblivious. On top of that, it seems to be oblivious that the collapse would infer in a multiplication of the problems.
Y en una reducción paralela de nuestra posibilidad de afrontarlos.
And in a parallel reduction of our possibilities to face them.
La segunda de las respuestas,
second of these answers,
tiene un carácter voluntarista.
has a voluntarist
disfruta de un
character.
apoyo social muy limitado.
The second answer has a very voluntarist character, but it enjoys from it is not as popular as the first.
Dice que tenemos que salir con urgencia del capitalismo.
It says that we need to get out of capitalism right away. We need to really get out of capitalism right now. We need to get out of capitalism yesterday.
Y que lo que hoy está al alcance de nuestra mano, permitidme que subraye esta cláusula verbal.
And what today is at our reach, and he wants to really point this out, that it's what the things that are our reach right now.
No estoy enunciando necesariamente mi proyecto, estoy hablando de algo que está al alcance de nuestra mano.
And he's not really announcing his proposal here. Is just something that is at our grasp right now.
Es abrir espacios autónomos.
Is opening autonomous spaces
autogestionados,
that are self-sufficient,
desmercantilizados,
demercantilized,
y ojalá despatriarcalizados.
And hopefully depatriarchalized. So he's going back on the concept that we've seen before. Yeah.
Dije antes que esos espacios existen ya.
He said before that those spaces exist already.
Estoy pensando en lo que suponen muchos grupos de consumo, algunas
consumption groups, places like consumption groups,
aldeas,
some eco villages,
las cooperativas integrales,
integral cooperatives,
las formas de banca ética y social que han ido germinando,
some ethical and social banks that have been sprouting here and there,
o el incipiente movimiento de trabajadoras que en el régimen autogestionario cooperativo se han hecho con el control de empresas que estaban al borde del cierre.
And the incipient movement of workers that, as a cooperative effort, they took over companies that were about to foreclose, basically, to close down, to shut down.
Yo tengo buena relación personal con algunos de nuestros más conocidos economistas socialdemócratas.
He is in good personal terms with some of the most known social democratic economists in Spain,
que siguen empeñados en convencerme de que la máxima prioridad en el momento presente es, qué sé yo, construir una banca pública.
And they're still, very stubborn in insisting to him that their first priority right now must be to build a public bank.
Me veo en la obligación de formular una pregunta insidiosa.
Of course, he needs to make this insidious question.
¿Cuánto tiempo nos queda?
How much time do we have left? Not much anymore.
Si el pronóstico que formulé antes,
if the prognosis that he formulated before,
aquel que identifica un periodo crítico,
that prognosis that identifies a critical period,
que es el que separa el 2020 del 2050, es certero,
if that prognosis that separates that announces this critical period that separates 2020 with 2050 is accurate,
la conclusión está servida. Estamos obligados a modificar rápida, abrupta y drásticamente todas las reglas del juego imperantes en nuestras sociedades.
And if that prognosis is accurate, we're bound to modify quickly, abruptly, and immediately all of the rules of the game that are in effect right now.
Esos espacios autónomos que acabo de invocar,
those autonomous spaces he just talked about,
a mi entender, solo alcanzarán sentido pleno si se confederan entre sí.
To his understanding, he thinks that they would only reach their own full potential if they federate with each other.
Y si acrecientan su dimensión de confrontación con el capital y con el Estado.
And if they grow in their dimension of confrontation against capital and the state.
En el buen entendido de que de nuevo hay división de opiniones en lo que respecta a para qué van a servir.
But it's also understood that there's a division of opinions in respect of what they're going to be, what's going to be their purpose.
Responden diciendo, nos van a servir para esquivar el riesgo del colapso.
And they reply by saying they're going to be good for us to avoid the risk of collapse.
Y hay quienes, probablemente más lúcidos,
and probably more lucid people are proposing,
responden, nos van a servir como escuelas para movernos en el escenario posterior al colapso.
They're going to be good for us as schools for us to function in the scenario after the collapse, which is happening.
¿Cuál es la novena y última de mis observaciones en forma de algunas rápidas conclusiones?
Ninth and last observation in the shape of very quick conclusions.
¿Qué dice la primera de ellas?
What's the first of it?
Tiene sentido que me pregunte si vamos a conseguir evitar el colapso.
Makes sense for him to wonder if we're going to be able to avoid the collapse.
La respuesta, en mi intuición, es que no.
His intuition is that the answer is no.
Que lo que está al alcance de nuestra mano es mitigar la manifestación de algunos de sus elementos más negativos.
That what is at our reach is to mitigate the manifestation of some of the harmful elements.
Y postergar un tanto en el tiempo esa manifestación.
And maybe delay it a little bit on time.
No estoy seguro, sin embargo, que esta segunda posibilidad, lo de postergar.
However, he's not absolutely sure that this second possibility, this delaying in time, this postergation,
sea particularmente inteligente.
Would be extremely smart.
Hay un libro de un norteamericano, John Michael Greer.
There's a book from John Michael Greer, writer from the U.S.
Tiene un título moderadamente divertido.
Which is titled, which has a moderately funny title, which is...
El libro se titula Colapse ahora y evite aglomeraciones.
Collapse now and avoid overcrowding, I guess. I need to look it up. What was the name of the guy again? Greer? Greer?
Hay un libro de un norteamericano, John Michael Greer.
John Michael Greer. Boop. Let's go to Wikipedia because it's fast. Biography, bibliography. Boop. What? Economicals? Ooh, there's a lot of stuff. Decline and fall. No future we ordered. After progress. Oh, collapse now and avoid the rush. That's it. I'm gonna leave you this guy. Boop. John Michael Greer. And it goes collapse now and avoid the rush. The best of the Arcade Report. Book from 2015. So, yeah.
Que tiene un título moderadamente divertido. El libro se titula
Collapse now and avoid the rush.
La tesis de Greer, que es fácil de entender, es: si vamos a colapsar, ¿no sería preferible que empezásemos a generar ya los rasgos propios de la sociedad colapsista?
So Greer's thesis is that, once we know we're going to collapse, why don't we start already developing the features of a post-collapse society?
Post-colapsista, en un momento en el que el cambio climático todavía no ha hecho valer.
In a moment where climate change hasn't been deployed already.
Sus consecuencias más negativas.
Its most negative consequences.
Y en el que disponemos de materias primas energéticas todavía en cantidades importantes.
And in which we still have access to an important amount of energy resources, right?
¿Cuál es la segunda de mis conclusiones?
Second conclusion.
Últimamente me da por identificar una habilidad ingente en el sistema que padecemos.
He lately has the wish to identify an enormous ability in the system that we're under right now.
La de conseguir que no nos hagamos las preguntas importantes.
The ability to make us not ask ourselves the important questions.
Permitidme que proponga un ejemplo de lo que quiero decir.
He's going to propose an
El discurso
example.
dominante afirma que tenemos que buscar nuevas fuentes de energía que nos permitan mantener esto que hemos alcanzado y, en su caso, acrecentarlo.
So the official discourse says that we need to find new energy sources that allow us to maintain this thing that we've reached for, that all of these things that we have right now, and even keep on growing.
¿Cuál es la gran pregunta que consiguen que no hagamos?
What is the big question that they manage to, for us not to ask ourselves?
¿Realmente nos interesa mantener esto que hemos alcanzado?
The question is, are we really interested in maintaining this thing that that thing that we have achieved already?
¿O obtendríamos ventajas visibles derivadas de prescindir de muchos de sus elementos?
Or would we obtain derivative advantage from leaving behind some of those elements?
Imaginaos que mañana el presidente de la Federación Rusa, el señor Putin,
Just imagine that tomorrow the president of the Russian Federation, Mr. Putin,
anunciase que su país ha descubierto en las aguas del Océano Glacial Ártico una formidable bolsa de hidrocarburos llamada a permitir que el consumo planetario de energía se mantenga.
So just figure that they discovered in Russia this huge pool of fossil fuels that would allow, this thing to go on for a number of years.
Conforme a los niveles actuales durante una década más.
For, say, an extra decade, conforming to today's levels.
¿Alguien piensa en serio que aprovecharíamos esos 10 años para repensar críticamente la sinrazón de nuestras sociedades?
Does anybody seriously think that we would take those 10 years to actually go and rethink our societies?
Doy por descontado que dentro de un decenio tendríamos que afrontar los problemas en términos muy similares a los actuales.
He's taken for granted that it's just that 10 years later, we would have to face similar problems that the ones that we're having to face right now.
¿Cuál es la tercera de mis conclusiones?
Third conclusion.
Las fuerzas políticas emergentes entre nosotras y algunas de las no tan emergentes
Some of the emerging political forces among us and some of them not so emerging ones. Yeah, advantages and disadvantages, definitely.
plantean discusiones interesantes en lo que hace a la condición del régimen que padecemos.
I'm putting some interesting discussions on the table regarding the issues that we're going on right now.
Pero me temo que poco o nada nos dicen sobre la naturaleza del sistema que está por detrás de ese régimen.
But he's afraid that they say barely nothing about the nature of the system that is behind that regime, right? We need to do a Venn diagram to show people. Go for it. I would suck at it. Yo, you thought this was how to catch a predator. What? No, this is Carlos Taibo. He's an absolute professor. He's a badass professor. He's teaching us about the collapse and the characteristics of the collapse and how we can avoid it and how we can do better.
¿En qué estoy pensando cuando hablo del régimen?
So what's he thinking about when he talks about the regime?
En el bipartidismo,
Two-party systems,
en la corrupción, en
corruption,
los problemas en materia de división de poderes,
problems in the matter of division of power. Thumbnail to stream just look funny. Okay. Wow, we're watching this Carlos Taibo documentary. I'm trying to translate and comment on it a little bit. Yeah, he's talking about the system and how what he means by the system right now.
En la propia discusión
Again, the system that these new political movements are failing to criticize properly, but are really focusing on the problems that the system is creating.
relativa a la república o a la monarquía.
Even in the dimension of the discussion about republic or monarchy.
¿En qué estoy pensando en cambio cuando me refiero al sistema?
What does he think? That's regime. So what does he mean with system?
En todo aquello de lo que no hablan los tertulianos de las radios y de las televisiones.
Everything that is not talked about in the debates in radio and television.
Ni siquiera los teóricamente más abiertos y alternativos.
Not even those that are presumed to be like higher level and open and alternative ones.
En el capitalismo.
Capitalism.
En el trabajo asalariado, en la
Wage labor.
mercancía, en la
Mercantile relationships and, merchandise.
alienación,
Commodities, alienation.
en la explotación, en la
Exploitation.
plusvalía, en la
Surplus.
sociedad patriarcal,
Patriarchal society.
en las guerras imperiales,
Imperial wars.
en la crisis ecológica.
Ecological crisis. So that's the system. Okay, so it's a regime. It's on one hand, which is heavily discussed, but system, about which is what's basically the main source of the problems is not discussed, and he's just listed it. Okay.
En el propio colapso.
In the collapse itself, that's part of the system.
Una palabra que acabo de utilizar, plusvalía.
And he's gonna focus on a word that he just used, which is surplus.
Hace un par de años corrió por las redes sociales.
A couple of years ago, was big on Spanish social networks, I assume.
Una frase muy ingeniosa que creo daba en el clavo de la cuestión.
A very ingenious sentence that he thinks was hitting it right in the nail, okay?
Qué bien decía, tú que estás tan preocupado.
It said something like along the lines of, you who are so worried,
Tan indignado por
so indignant.
la corrupción, ya verás cómo vas a flipar el día que te enteres de lo que es la plusvalía.
You people who are so absolutely outraged and worried about corruption, you're gonna have a hard time the moment that you know what surplus is.
La corrupción es un fenómeno inquietante,
Corruption it's quite an unsettling phenomenon.
indignante,
It's very outrageous.
probablemente sistémico.
I mean, probably systemic.
Pero remite, veamos las cosas como las veamos,
But it goes back, however we want to see it,
a la marginalia de ese sistema.
to the margins of that system.
La plusvalía da cuenta, en cambio, de la explotación cotidiana.
Surplus, it takes into account everyday exploitation. So it's yeah. And if you see the numbers, I'm not gonna see the numbers because I get numbers all jumbled. But I have this idea of the amount of wealth lost to corruption. It's a pebble in the beach of surplus theft. That's the most egregious theft that we've ever seen.
Todos los días de miles de millones de seres humanos.
This is the daily theft upon millions and millions of human beings.
¿Cuánto tiempo dedicamos a hablar sobre la corrupción?
So how much time do we spend talking about corruption?
¿Y cuánto tiempo destinamos, ninguno, a discutir sobre la plusvalía cuando es el elemento fundamental de vertebración de la miseria de nuestra sociedad?
And we spend no time talking about surplus when surplus is the basic element of marginalization in our societies.
¿Cuál es la cuarta conclusión a la que quiero llegar?
Fourth conclusion, here comes.
Tengo la impresión de que los hechos en los años venideros van a experimentar una aceleración formidable.
He worked under the impression that in the upcoming years, these things are gonna experiment an incredible acceleration, and we've been seeing like the latest economic crisis alongside the health crisis with COVID-19 has been really crazy as acceleration. Let me remind you all that this happened before the COVID-19 pandemic, okay? And he was foreseeing that this acceleration.
De tal manera que muchos de los conceptos que desde tiempo atrás nos han servido para organizar nuestra visión del mundo,
in a way that most of the concepts that before in the earlier times have done, we've been using to conceptualize our world,
van a dejar de servirnos.
they're gonna be rendered useless.
Siempre que hablo de esto, procuro recuperar una anécdota que escuché por primera vez hace 20 años.
So he's going to recover an anecdote from 20 years ago because he uses every time that he talks about this subject.
La historia cuenta que en Estados Unidos se rodó una película cuyo argumento principal era que Albania le declaraba la guerra a Estados Unidos.
So they were shooting this movie in the United States in which the main plot said that Albania was declaring war on the United States.
En una tertulia de intelectuales en Francia, en la que había un albanés, procedieron a discutir si esa película se podía proyectar en Albania o, por el contrario, hería sentimientos nacionales profundos.
So there was this debate in France in which one Albanese interlocutor was participating, and they were discussing if it was appropriate or it would be allowed for that movie to be projected in Albania, or if the Albanian national feelings would be hurt.
Unos pensaban lo uno, los otros defendían lo otro.
Several positions, this and that, yada yada.
El albanés, lo cierto es que permanecía callado.
And the Albanese guy remained very silent, okay?
Hasta
Very
que
quiet.
en un momento determinado, la
Up until a certain point where
conversación bajó de tono
the conversation eased down, took a little bit, everything got quieter,
se escuchó su vocecita
and his little voice came up.
y se limitó a decir:
He just
en
said,
Albania no hay cines.
there are no movie theaters in Albania.
Esta interesantísima discusión sobre si la película se podía proyectar o no en Tirana, en Durrës o en Scutari
So this incredibly interesting conversation about whether the film would be able to be projected in Tirana, in Durrës, or Scutari,
pendía de un elemento material, la existencia de cines, que faltaba.
and it was depending on a material element, the existence of movie theaters, that was absolutely lacking.
Tengo la impresión de que en los años venideros vamos a tener que repetir muchas veces que en Albania no hay cines.
So he works under the impression that in the coming years, show your feet? What? I don't know. What do you mean? That's weird. Okay. So he works under the impression that in the coming years we're gonna say this a lot. There are no theaters no movie theaters in Albania, or something along those lines.
Cuando escuchemos, por ejemplo, inopinadamente, que aparecerán con certeza nuevas tecnologías que nos permitirán resolver problemas que hoy se nos antojan inabordables.
So when we listen that the unasked opinion that there are gonna be new technologies that allow us to face problems that right now are impossible to solve.
Y tengamos que preguntar en el escenario del colapso, ¿de dónde van a surgir las energías que van a permitir mover esas maravillosas tecnologías?
And we're gonna need to ask in the scenario of the collapse, where are we gonna get the energy for those technologies to work?
¿Cuál es la quinta y última de mis conclusiones?
Fifth and last
De
conclusion.
un tiempo a esta parte me declaro inmerso en una lucha sin cuartel contra los proyectos realistas.
This is great. He declares himself immersed in a ruthless fight against realist projects that declare themselves to be realist. And there's this wonderful sentence he's going to say right now.
Cuando escucho que alguien dice, es que esto que estáis defendiendo no es realista,
When I listen to someone saying, this thing you're defending is not realistic,
me disparan todas las alarmas.
all the alarms are ringing for him.
No conozco mejor ilustración de las miserias del realismo que la transición política española.
He doesn't know any better example of the miseries of realism than the Spanish transition from dictatorship to quote-unquote democracy, I would say, the bourgeois democracy led by parliamentary monarchy, which is laughable process, to be honest.
Materializada en dos grandes partidos que
It was materialized in two big parties in a bipartisan system. That realism, that's what it got us.
se han turnado en el gobierno y han hecho en
That have been taking turns in the government,
sustancia lo mismo.
and they have done in substance, they've done the same.
En dos cúpulas sindicales que infelizmente no se oponen a nada.
In two major unions that, alas, they don't oppose any advance from the company owners.
Y en una plétora de medios de comunicación que repiten monocordes las mismas monsergas y manipulaciones.
And in a plethora of media that repeat at the same unison the propaganda from the status quo.
Hay una frase muy sonora y un
There's a very loud sounding sentence,
poco incorrecta
which is a little bit incorrect,
de Bernanos, el
from Bernanos,
novelista católico francés, que
the French Catholic lawyer,
creo da en el clavo de la cuestión.
which he thinks hits the matter right in the nail.
La frase dice: el realismo es la buena conciencia de los hijos de puta.
He says the realism is the good conscience of the motherfuckers. Of the pieces of shit. You know, if you want to be a piece of shit, you can have some realism there. Because it's going to give you peace of heart. Yeah, it sounds like the US as well. Bipartisan system, yeah. Shitty media, and yeah. It's capitalism. That's the common denominator. And of course, whatever we build needs to be adapted to our local culture and material conditions. But a common target that we all have, everyone around the world, is getting rid of fucking capitalism. Everybody, everywhere on the planet. It's, except for Vietnam and a few more places that, are lucky enough. But we need to get rid of capitalism. And yeah, realism is the good conscience of the pieces of shit.
Invocan la realidad como si viniese dada por la naturaleza, cuando con toda evidencia esa realidad que invocan la han creado ellos mismos.
And it's because they invoke reality as if it were created by nature, when that reality has been created absolutely by them.
En descarado provecho de sus intereses más ruines, más mezquinos.
In the interests of the most vile and awful interests, capitalism is killing us, definitely. You know the way. You know the drill, Johnny. You know how it goes. Capitalism kills and punishes and it's keeping us in absolute misery. It's sorry, it's back to the lecture.
En estas condiciones me temo que no nos queda más remedio que ser orgullosamente no realistas.
So under these conditions, I'm afraid that we have no choice but to be proudly unrealistic.
Gracias por haberme escuchado.
Thank you for listening. So yeah, I'm not going to go through the Q&A right now, but yeah, I'm going to gather some of these thoughts because I think it's very interesting stuff. I hope you liked it. I hope you all liked it. It's a very brainy lecture from this professor who is really awesome. I'm not 100% on board with some of the predicaments. Like, I'm all for technology, but I really love the it's a great talk. I listened to it. I think it was this morning or yesterday, I think. And I was like, I need to put this on stream. These people need to know. This needs to be shared. I'm here just to jump the language barrier and maybe talk a little bit with y'all. Yeah, there's gonna be VOD here on Twitch for a few days, and I'm gonna put it permanently on YouTube. So no worries, you can catch up again. It's really good stuff. And if you see the guy Carlos Taibo, and if you see something translated to English, feel free to catch up. Good stuff. This guy is absolutely based in yeah. He's luckily retired. He used to be like a politics professor in the the Autónoma University in Madrid, Spain. But I'm all for the growth. I'm all for simplifying. I'm all for, but I agree so much that technologies need to be analyzed, to be decolonized, like our minds. Our technologies need to be decolonized from that capitalist realism. But again, not to take it as far as anarcho-primitivism. That's a little bit, because most of those technologies are serving right now people who are disabled, or most of those advances are helping people who have it rough. So we need not leave disabled people behind, not on my watch at least. So I know you left that comment that you would be catching up on YouTube. Yeah, you left that comment last time. It was really nice. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm gonna make some more live shows. Okay, I guess next week. I'm done for the week for sure. So Wednesday tops, I'll be on again with something new I found, or someone who wants to talk. I don't know. We'll figure out. And Prim's take it too far. I agree so much. But I also he said something along the lines that unhinged thinkers are the most interesting thinkers. It's like you don't take everything to heart, but analyze, critically and say, okay, this is a little bit off, but this bit, I like it. And you deploy it, and you analyze it and go for, the good ideas. You separate I'm here so everyone has to smoke some weed. I don't smoke. I never started smoking. But you're welcome here, Raka42. Fully automated luxury communism. Yeah, if we could. I mean, from my point of view, the main issue, the main problem is right now is the scarcity of resources. This collapse that is happening. We're living the collapse a little bit. Just the first legs, the first moments of the collapse. They're happening right now. I don't know how fast it's going to be. But capitalism is going down, and it's going to take with it most of the structures and most of the resources and technology. I haven't shown it because this stream is long enough already. But after the fact, there's some Q&A, and there's this farmer who says that, for instance, there was this mineral that they're using for agriculture, for the land. One of the basics, I think it was phosphorus, and they were running out of phosphorus basically. And they're the position that they're needing to import phosphorus right now, and that's really rough. Ocean beds are being wasted. I mean, there's a lot of stuff like oil, fossil fuels, and stuff are running out, and we're not really transitioning to better energy models in renewables. So energy is going to be lacking. So as much as I would love to live in fully automated luxury communism, you harvested your smallest plant today. Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Keep those plants healthy, and keep that good resin flowing. Take it easy, don't abuse it. Just use it for your benefit. I hope it's good stuff. Accelerationism, I'm not for accelerationism. I'm definitely not for it, because it makes a lot of people suffer. But the fact that the collapse is upon us is absolutely undeniable. So it's about rescuing, saving people as much as possible, and changing those values of competition of hyperproductivity by cooperation, distribution of labor. I think Professor Taibo really nailed it in those aspects, like the new values that we need to promote, which would be like solidarity, familiarity, degrowth, simplify life in general, and of course be ready, because the agents of the system they're gonna be very rough on us, to be honest. So we're gonna need to work on our protection and everything. But I think the new world needs to be born out of the ashes of the old one. And in a way, capitalism is doing such a great job at destroying itself. It just wants to take us all along for the ride. What we need is to work hard on saving each other, on helping each other, having people not fall alongside capitalism. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. I think I'm gonna cut the recording right here for the people on YouTube. If you want to catch me live on stream, at Twitch is at Javitrino, Javitrino. And I'm gonna cut the streaming right here.